All right, welcome everybody. We are going to get started here in just a minute. We got a couple of cool guests to hang out with us tonight. We got Jonan from New Relic. We got Peter from Fang Companies. We'll get into their background in a little bit. Super excited that they're here to help us out. Want to lay down a couple of ground rules to kind of get started as people sort of filter in on the chat and so on. Just a handful of rules. We're all here to be supportive, be helpful to one another. We want to be kind to one another and encouraging. This stream is all about sharing knowledge. This stream is all about like helping each other out. What do I know that I can help you with? What do you know that you can help me with? How can we do that together collectively, make each other better? By all means, in chat, offer advice, add your own perspectives on things. We want to relay some of what's going on in chat into the stream as well as we go. So please drop little bits of advice and perspective. We'll get that into the discussion as well. And just, be mindful of chat. Try to avoid too much like hateful talk and excessive swearing and things like that. That would be wonderful. What's up, Lunsford Space? Good to see you. Thanks for hanging out in chat. All right, so without further ado, we're going to get this thing started here. And we are going to interview both Jonan and Peter. So let's get them on the stream. There we go. Oops, let's just do that one. There we go. So welcome. We got Jonan on the top bubble. We got Peter on the bottom bubble. Just to give
we got the top bubble, Peter.
Yeah. Cool. So just a little bit of background. So Peter and I met several years ago working with Coder Dojo. It was a platform, a space to kind of teach kids about coding and get them involved in tech. Peter was already involved in the group when I got involved, and it was super great to kind of get to know him a little bit and work with his kids, and he worked with my kids a little bit, and just teaching some programming stuff like that was a lot of fun. And so we'll go into a little bit of Peter's background a little bit. Jonan from the Jonan Show. Everybody knows Jonan. I think Jonan's got quite a follow of his own, both on Twitter and on Twitch. So appreciate both your time tonight. Thought we'd just hang out, do a little bit of Q&A. Definitely want to take some comments and so on from chat as we go. I got some questions to kind of like fill any lulls. Peter's going to hang out with us for about an hour. When Peter drops off the call, I think Jonan and I are actually going to get into a resume review. So we're gonna we got a resume submitted through techinterview.guide/streaming. If you want a free resume review on the stream, go ahead on there, upload a PDF version of your resume, and we'll pick it apart a little bit and give you some feedback on it. Cool. Well, let's start with Peter. Peter, why don't you give us a little bit of background on like how did you get into tech? What was sort of your sort of growing into tech story, and talk about like some of the Fang involvement that you've been doing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Getting early into kind of my entry to tech, I started kind of in the hardware swap, these big computer shows that were held at like county fairgrounds and things like that. You might remember them back in like the early 2000s, mostly unloading trucks full of CPUs and memory chips and whatnot. And I really enjoyed doing that.
Nothing shady at all about buying hardware off the back of a truck, right?
Totally legit. Then I got into, more like the bench tech stuff, actually building out the computers and learning a lot about all the interrupts, IRQs, all the early stuff of debugging, early hardware type setups, and did that well into sort of the end of high school, and off I went to college to pursue a CS degree, and the rest is history. I then started working for the university I was at as a Linux sysadmin. That was when I really started learning like what it meant to work professionally and in tech. Having a demanding user pool and keeping them happy and keeping systems up and online, and felt very fortunate for the university to hire me to do that work. And then segued into working professionally as a software engineer. I've been doing it for 20 years now.
Nice. And you started in kind of a finance sort of role, is that right? And then you kind of transitioned from there into some other types of work?
I did. I had a stint sort of in fintech, doing a lot of the back-end sort of systems that would deal with settling transactions and working with different sort of file formats and moving data around. Then that's when I moved into a startup, Ping Identity, back when it was in its early days. Had a lot of fun with sort of those early days of startup culture and watched the company grow, which at that point I exited to go off to Fang World and have been in Fang World since.
Nice. Awesome. Thanks, Peter, for the intro. And Jonan, you took a less traditional route, although I'm starting to hesitate to call this like traditional versus non-traditional because I think your route of learning is starting to kind of catch up with what we would consider the more traditional like 4-year kind of CS degree. But fill us in a little bit on your background and how you got into tech.
The boot camp babies are winning.
Yeah.
We will take you down. We So I actually had a lot of weird jobs after I got out of school. I went to school to study little computer science at the University of Oregon, and I was in the CS program there for a couple of years and decided right around the crash of 2000 that was not for me. Looking around the world at all of my sad programmer friends who lived their lives in cubicles and were being abused by game companies, I was like, I think I'm good on this. But you don't realize, of course, when you're on the outside, what a narrow view of software you may be getting. Had I realized that I could have the career that I have had in software, I would have been here right away. But I don't at all regret my time away and exploring other things. I did a lot of weird things. I worked in hotels as a concierge, and I was a car salesman. I was a bouncer. In my last job before I got into tech, I was dealing poker at a casino, and they dropped me right before my son was born, about 3 weeks before, as the poker boom was winding down. And at the time, we didn't have any of this Obamacare stuff where you could just go out and get health insurance willy-nilly. You had to work for a corporation. So I was terrified and quickly found a way to get a job at a tech company where I was an apprentice software engineer because I knew HTML. So I was chopping up PSD layouts into HTML pages. And I eventually talked them into making me, well, I wasn't an apprentice software engineer at that point. I eventually talked them into making me an apprentice software engineer. I was just a layout person. And then from there, I got into a code school. So I went to a boot camp called Hungry Academy about 10 years ago. That was a 6-month-long boot camp. It was entirely funded. They paid us full-time engineering salaries to go and learn to code. And then we went to work for Living Social. And Living Social was like a Groupon competitor, since acquired by Groupon. And after there, I came to New Relic, went off to do some DevRel at Heroku for a long time, and now have come back around boomerang style to work at New Relic again and set up their DevRel team for them, which has been a fantastic experience. But I was along the way many different roles, and now I am finally managing. It's been a very different world for the last year for me to come into that, but that's my path. That's how I ended up here.
And Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, you also got into a little bit on the management side as well, is that right?
I have in a couple of my roles, but I had this tendency to kind of gravitate back towards individual contributor, but back in a manager role again. I love both roles.
I ping pong myself back and forth because as I would do one, I would miss doing the other. And so, yeah, my last like 6 or 7 jobs was like, I want to lead. No, I want to contribute. No, I want to lead. No, I want to contribute. And yeah, I think when I was teaching at Turing, it was kind of the best of both worlds because I felt like a lead developer who was like still like developing, coming up with project ideas, but I was basically managing, 20, 30 junior devs at a time, which felt like a lot, but lots of help, lots of other instructors there as well. It kind of felt like the best of both worlds for sure. Yep.
On that note, I mean, one thing I'd add there is I will say I've found it hard to enter a company as a manager. I do enjoy more entering as an IC, understanding like what it means to deliver software, than moving into that leadership role. I don't know, that seemed to be the recipe for me that I've enjoyed most.
Jamo Griff from the chat gave us a question. Yeah. If I can interrupt briefly.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a good icebreaker one. What was the last piece of technology you built or encountered that made you smile?
Ooh. So as part of this live stream, Jonan kind of turned me onto this sort of web RTC kind of thing to get the audio and the video going. And I coded up just a little script to kind of say like, here's a random sort of hexadecimal thing, and like email that out to Jonan and Peter to say like, hey, click this link and join the live stream, and like kind of automating the mundane. That's one of the things that I love doing as a developer. Like find something sort of monotonous. Like I could start everything up and then like copy and paste into emails or LinkedIn or whatever, however I'm communicating with people. I'm like, no, I'm going to automate this, where I can just type in an email address and it just shoots off the email for me. So that was pretty fun. Just seeing that thing work is great.
I'd say oh, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I do far too little of that. I'm thinking of all of the things that I do just manually copying with pasting. I was like, why don't I just get a MailChimp API key and go to town? Yeah.
Right.
Go on. Go ahead, Peter.
I'd say the last piece of software that made me smile, it had a lot to do with just sort of supporting my parents and as they get older. And there's this technology I help contribute to, which is a small pill that contains a camera and other sensors, and you swallow it and it replaces what is the conventional colonoscopy. And wow. Seeing that product shipped and making this procedure just that more accessible, that less invasive, like there's so many good things about it that I was like, this feels good to contribute to.
It's just like really for the inside version of a GoPro. You can just like recreationally take films of your guts.
It makes the worst home videos ever.
I imagine. That's awesome, though.
I have so many questions.
Yeah.
I hope it's Bluetooth, so you don't have to like collect the device later or something.
I mean, it's got to be spendy. That's an expensive little pill. You're keeping it, I imagine. Clean it well.
Too funny.
That's cool, though. That's actually a really cool application. Last piece of code I wrote that made me smile was probably pretty well. Okay, so there's like this Minecraft script that I wrote called MineMaker that will spin up a Minecraft server for me, or a whole fleet of them on DigitalOcean, and I can tell it to go make me 20 Minecraft servers, and it spins up Docker containers to dump debug data out of the Minecraft servers. I've got like the server itself spins up, and then there's a little sidecar thing that not like in the Kubernetes sense, but just a little Docker container that pokes it and actually like sends a string that will cause it to debug log and dump its debug logs. Now I parse the debug logs and find out data I can send off to New Relic, so I can say like, here's how many zombies exist in the whole game and how many chickens are dying this very moment, and that kind of data. And that it makes me giggle every time I use it. I really like it.
What benefit do you have of spinning up like a whole bunch of Minecraft servers? Like, do people actually log in and play, or you're just doing it to collect those kinds of stats, or what do you use it for?
I originally built it because I wanted to be able to on demand spin up a large fleet. Like it's things like we do are most relevant at scale. So it's like if you've got 40 versions of this thing running, that's more relevant information, and you get these cool like hexagon views and see which one is doing well and which one's sad. And so you could actually compare the performance. But yeah, like the max I think for a single Minecraft server instance is like 10 people or something, unless you go with like the mega instances or whatever before it starts to kind of fall over. So having lots of them lets me plug people into different ones, and then I can compare. You can chart the number of chickens across instances. It's very important work.
That's great.
Minecraft observability.
Yes, exactly.
Yep. Cool. Well, thanks, Jamogriff, for the question. That was a great one. Before that, I was going to ask, so it kind of feels like all three of us got to a point in our career where we either wanted to lead a team or were asked to lead a team and end up down a management track. Do you find that that's a more sort of natural progression for a lot of folks, or do you feel that some folks, over time in their career, they may feel like they're being pushed or maybe shoved in that direction where they just want to stay an individual contributor? Like, have you known anybody that got into management that are like, I didn't want to do this. Like, I would rather be coding.
Peter?
I feel like I've only seen that at like much larger sort of corporate bureaucratic type companies where that path is sort of the only path of advancement for a technologist is, inevitably some sort of management. Every time I've pursued it, I feel like I've done it with my own interest. I was following sort of my own desire to either create a new team. In this case, what I'm doing now is creating a new team and building it from the ground up, which is, a super unique opportunity to do like a startup within a big company. So I feel like it's maybe in some environments that push is there, but I think if you choose where you're at carefully, you can truly pursue it if it is indeed something you're interested in learning more about and trying on for size.
Yeah, this is, I think, the most I've ever managed in or out of the industry right now. I've got 10 people on my team, but it was a greenfield team, and that's the way I want to do it forever. I'm not so very interested in walking into the recently departed manager's shoes again, where it's like, okay, here's your team, and they hate you because you're not their old boss. And like, I mean, not that like it was
Sometimes
actually
that could be good though.
Yeah, sometimes that could be good. In fact, in the cases that I had that outside of tech, it was good. But this is a fantastic opportunity. I think that I got tricked a little bit because I originally joined the company because I made this crazy pitch for how DevRel should be done, and they were like, "Oh, okay." I thought they were just asking my advice, and then they were like, "No, I mean like write your job description," and I was like, "Okay." They're like, "Now hire all these people to do your dream job while you watch." I was like, "Oh, this seems like a bad deal. This is not what I intended at all." But it actually turns out to be immensely satisfying, right? As most managers know, you get to kind of operate from a different level, and you support other people to their success, and it feels like you got to play a hand in that. So it's still very satisfying work.
Yeah, that was a real mind shift for me, like getting into a lead position where you have to kind of let go of that control and say, I have to trust that you can do this job and you can be a part of this. And finding it very fulfilling to find the joy in someone else's success. I think it's a very different way of thinking of like, wow, look what you did, that's awesome, or look what the team did, that's awesome, and like giving credit down to the team instead of like, look at me, look at what I was able to manage and do. It was them, and I think that that's an important part of being a manager, certainly. But I found that it was kind of a mind shift for me, to be able to find that joy in what others do and in their success, and giving them the credit and the kudos and things like that, and then watching them kind of light up from that.
I've seen so many managers miss that piece too, and I'm not sure if it's ego or what drives people to do that, but the bit that we've all experienced, I'm sure, where the managers are taking all of the credit and passing all of the blame, right? And it's just,
right.
I have not ever really been in a meeting with a manager who took credit for some body of work and felt like, oh yes, surely this was entirely driven by you. Like it is so obvious to everyone around that you were not actually doing the work, because we were all doing all the meetings and all of the strategy and all of the planning. And like, I am very fortunate on my team to get to stream occasionally, but mostly it happens in my evenings, you know? Yeah. So I don't understand that impulse. I very much am of the school of thought that like the success of the team is the team's success generally. And like, I get to count myself among the team, right? I definitely count is like our team, we accomplished a thing rather than like any one individual. But the managers who go on the other side, I just don't really understand that style or approach.
Right. Good question in chat. It says, any particularly good stories of a we did it kind of moment in management?
We did it kind of moment as in
like we as a team, like you know, in sort of a lead or management kind of role, like, yeah, go team, look what we did, you know, like the collaborative effort and celebrate as a team.
Every day. Every day I look around and I'm just like, wow, like look at what you all have been able to accomplish. I watch, you know, we measure things and I care less about like the numbers of things and more just about like the quality of the things that this team is able to produce. And I stand in awe of them. It's really impressive work, all of it. I love it.
Peter, any thoughts? Anything stand out to you?
Yeah, I would sort of echo the same sentiment about when you're building a team from sort of the ground up, like the Greenfield team, which is, like I said, a great privilege to get to do. And then you see that newly formed team deliver that first meaningful payload of software. Like that to me is the we did it moment. I had a distinct example of that, again, citing my time at Ping, where I got to form a team within sort of the lab's capacity to do some new product development. And, you know, I hired some external folks, grabbed some other people from different teams, and built this team rather quickly. And when we, you know, delivered our first software payload, had our first customer buy the product, like those were definitely the moments. And they actually culminated around a giant gong where we would whack the gong to celebrate those. And I remember one of them where I hit the gong so hard I cracked the mallet.
That's a very different, I assume then this is a very different perspective for people shipping software daily, because in DevRel we ship a lot of things, and those include like streams and YouTube videos and blog posts. There's no like moment in the team when it's like, here is the thing. We have prepared the thing, and now we are launching the thing. We have like major projects that we kick off, like the team launch or our summer camp. They're doing a summer camp content series right now, but those are all kind of like progressive projects. It's interesting because I hadn't actually thought about that detail, that in DevRel you're just kind of like pushing things out all the time, code or whatever, and in a software team there's very much a like, well, here's the due date, we shipped. Yeah.
Gosh, does that suggest that like continuous integration and continuous delivery diminishes the frequency of we did it moments?
That's a good point. Yeah. I'm gonna have to add a little "we did it" emoji or something to our CI pipeline.
Right. That's great. Cool. Well, hey, I appreciate the intros. I think that was kind of a good start. Let's dive into some interview stuff. How's that sound?
I am pleased to be interviewing with you today. Could you reverse a linked list for me, please?
I could. Next time.
Okay.
Yeah. Interview prep is something that's been near and dear to my heart. It's something that I've been doing for years and years, and that's partly why I wanted to start this stream. It's just find a way to like mass dump my brain out there, but also to have awesome folks like you come in and share your perspectives. I like to kind of start a lot of my opinion sort of things with kind of this goofy little joke that says opinions are like armpits. Generally, everybody's got a couple. Some of them stink. But you know, the real version of that one uses a different body part, but yeah, let's be family friendly here. So what I want to do is I want to kind of like jump into some questions around the idea of like interview prep and career prep and how to get ready for tech interviews and things of that nature. And partly why I wanted to talk to both of you is because you've done interviewing. But also based on your background, the kinds of jobs and the kinds of interviews that you've had to sit through. And, you know, has there been any drastic shift that you've noticed in the style of interviewing and how companies do interviews, especially now that we've gone remote, or a lot of companies have gone remote? Like, how has that sort of changed the landscape? So just to sort of set the stage on that, let's dive into like a handful of questions. Definitely want some questions in chat. So if you're in chat, drop questions in there. We're going to interject those kind of along the way as we go. So definitely drop questions in there if you've got them along the way. So like the big one, you know, we'll start off with this one. Like, how do you get a job with different size of companies, or how do you sort of pick what size of company to go to apply to? Do you start at a small job? Do you start at a big company? Do you shoot for something in the middle? How would you advise somebody like what sort of company to even apply to in the first place?
So I'm going to recommend sort of that middle, medium-sized company. Again, sort of citing my time at Ping, it was sort of small to medium-sized when I joined, and the breadth of experience that I got there, because you must wear more hats to complete software projects as opposed to being very narrowly focused on a specific, say, feature or product. That's where I felt like I was able to get my hands into the most different varied types of technologies and learn, you know, a little bit about everything. Even taking on sort of DevOps before it was a word in the vernacular of software. So for someone entering or early in their career, I feel like that size of company affords that type of opportunity and really helps round out the expertise for that next stage of the career.
Cool. Jonan, any thoughts?
I don't very much enjoy like working in the big pond. Like, I think if I were just starting out in my career, I would do approximately what I did do, which is to aim for pretty medium-sized companies. I worked at very small companies over the years, and like not necessarily just that is reflected in my resume history. I've been, you know, moonlighting along the way and all sorts of things. But I like to be there between like 50 and 150 people is a very interesting time to join a company. 50 and 200, when you're getting out of that startup phase where things are just like everyone's hair is on fire all the time and everyone's doing all the jobs and like the life is chaos. I wouldn't recommend that for someone just starting out in their career, for I think fairly clear reasons that like you need to have a little more structure than that. But going through that early growth phase is a really interesting period of time with a company. And then I like companies maybe as big as New Relic, which is around 2,000-ish people, I think now. That's kind of the upper bound for me. I went through Salesforce where we had, 50,000 people or something, and you manage to preserve ideally some like idea around culture and values, but you do kind of feel like a cog in the machine a lot of days. And I think early on in your career, you're going to need a lot more personal attention from the people around you, strong mentorship, and it may be easier to find in a place where you can be less anonymous. Conversely, go ahead.
No, you finish. Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, there are pockets in large companies where that's true, like often, right? You can find isolated teams, but you do need to do a little more research and like find the right place for you within the organization.
I was going to say, I think that was a really good point. Like, I would also recommend, like, if you're starting out in your career as a dev, trying to find like a small, medium-sized company, like 50 to 100 or 150 people. But it also depends on the ratio of the engineering team, because if the company is like a product-based company and engineering supports that, the engineering team might only be like 10 people, and you're not going to have as much support in that role as if you were like in an engineering sort of centric kind of company where maybe it's 100 people, but like 75 of them are in engineering and the rest are like marketing and sales. And so I think a lot of that does play a big role in that as well. But if you're starting out in your career, you definitely need that mentorship. But I think you can't really go wrong with starting in a mid-sized company. I think that's a really good sort of place to target to kind of get started on that. Large-sized companies can be good as well. I think you can, just in my experience and talking with people and interviewing, I think you can get a lot more support, and there can be a little more cushion as far as like deadlines go. But yeah, you get into those small startups, like everything's on fire, everything's urgent, you got to like deliver now. And yeah, you're wearing a lot of hats and you're thrown into all of this responsibility. And that's not a great place to be early in your career. I think that's a better thing to sort of wait until you've got a couple years experience and kind of like how to self-motivate as well. And then you can maybe target those startups, and be more willing to wear more hats at that point, I think.
We got a couple questions from the chat, I think.
Yeah, some really good ones in there. I think we'll do Jen's question first, then we'll go to the one about salaries. So does the size of past companies you've worked for make a big difference to interviewers? I'm going to start on this one. I would say I don't think so. Like as a manager, like when I would interview people, it didn't really matter to me how big the company was, as it was important to see that you had some sort of progression of growth for however long you were in that role. Like if you're just doing the same sort of thing over and over for years, I kind of say, well, you had 1 year of experience 4 times, versus if you're progressively like constantly growing in that job. Now I could say, okay, you've got 4 years of experience versus 1 year 4 times. And I'm kind of stealing that from Jeff Casimir at Turing. He kind of mentioned that. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good way to explain it. And so as a manager, I'm less interested in where you've worked as I am in how have you progressed in your career. What do you folks think?
I feel like depending on the role, like especially for roles that are, in FANG companies where at scale computing experience is one of, oftentimes a core requirement, you usually kind of only get that experience working at a large size, internet scale company. So that's tricky because, obviously there are entry level positions that don't require that, but, mid, senior level, principal level roles generally are expecting you have done that type of work, which would suggest you've been in that setting previously.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I maybe think about it less. But I am looking for people who have relevant experience. I guess I don't really take companies as indicative of humans, really. Like, you're kind of in some way reverse branding people. Like, they, if I worked at Google, then later on in my career, people were like, "Oh, Jonan is Google people." I might be surprised by that decision, right? Or that I worked in a large company like that would mean that I'm qualified to do anything else. And this often happens with large companies. It's a powerful thing to have the right kind of names on your resume, but it doesn't necessarily indicate that you are prepared or willing or able to do the work that is in that particular role. So I feel like maybe it has less influence. I'm more impressed by seeing the actual work that people have been able to do in those places. Like, I'm not so much reading the company names as I am the blurbs on a resume about what you accomplished and which projects you were involved in and what you're really proud of about your work that you did there. And when you fall short on those things, that's something I'm more likely to pay attention to. But that is certainly relevant, I think. Like, if you're talking Peter's point about scale, that absolutely applies. If you've never managed a fleet of 500 servers, and I need you to manage a fleet of 500 servers, it's going to be a lot of learning for you to do. It's just a question of like how many pieces we can bring you along for it. Do you have to learn that and a new language and a new management style, or is that just the one piece of learning? Because I think that if you can really focus all your energies on that, then you can learn it as you come.
Yeah, it's a good point. And
It's funny.
I would say at one job, we actually had someone apply from a FANG company, and the whole company's like, "Oh, good, now we've got this, really senior developer from this FANG company, and they're gonna come in and save the day." And they got into this company, and we were probably 100 people or so, 150 at most. And the person came in and they're like, "All right, what do I do?" And they're like, "Well, you tell us, you worked at this FANG company." And they're like, "No, like, I'm used to just being told what to go do." Like, they weren't part of the strategy team. They weren't part of the design team. They were just an individual contributor at a senior level. And we had completely misunderstood sort of what their involvement was, because we just saw on the resume, like, "Oh, FANG company, they must be brilliant." And they were. Like, clearly, this person was very intelligent, very smart, and they were very capable. But, we hadn't interviewed at the time to, like, really get to the meat of, can you strategize and can you come up with helping us and helping our company grow, maybe not to FANG scale, but like, we certainly had a lot of like bottlenecks and things to work through. And it was just something that they were unprepared to do. And so I think those kinds of things are important. So back to kind of what Jonan was saying, I think the exact company on your resume maybe doesn't matter as much. The size of the company, going back to the original question, I don't know that the size of the company really matters. I think a lot of managers just want to know, like, what have you done? What have you learned there? Have you progressed in those skills? Are you better now than before you took that job? I think that's really all we're going to care about during an interview.
I think it does matter in certain spheres. I should clarify my point that, like, it matters as much as MIT CS degree versus University of Oregon CS degree matters on my resume. Quite a lot to the right set of people. I don't necessarily care about those people's attention. Is the thing that there are people who are like FANG extremists. We only hire people from FANG because we only hire the creme de la creme, and like what you end up with is a monoculture, and it's formed by a very different segment of the population, but it's still a monoculture. Just pay attention to the projects that people are involved in. If you are correctly hiring to the competencies of the role, if you decided, like, here are the skills we need, this is what someone needs to be successful, and they may not have all of them, but if they have more blanks than not, they're going to have a bad time here. We are aiming to hire for that candidate's success, not so much so we can squeeze maximum shareholder value, but because we want this person to be happy and fulfilled here. And if they are missing 3 or 4 out of the 5 things that we decided are must-haves to succeed in this role, we have to decide whether or not we have the resources to support them in growing into those competencies. And so I think there is like this name brand thing that happens. Like, you look down someone's resume and it's all these FANG companies or other very large corporations, and people make assumptions about what it takes to get into those places. But I've been in those places, and people end up in there for all sorts of reasons. It's a very large place, so I don't necessarily trust that as much, but it conveys equal advantage. I just want to point out that, like, very much like going to a Harvard Business School as opposed to like another state school somewhere conveys
Right.
advantages to people, right?
Yeah. Awesome. Jen Develops, thanks for hanging out on the stream. I appreciate that question. We'll get to your other question in a sec. I want to circle back to Dota to Attitude's question. How do you deal with your own salary expectations? In tech, it seems like the salaries are all over the place, and setting your own personal bar seems incredibly difficult. Broaching the subject during the interview seems easier. Um, the salary expectation question is probably going to come up early in the case of a lot of companies, because they want to know, like, do we even spend the time interviewing you, or are you going to ask for way too much money and that's out of the realm of possibility? Or do you even understand your worth and be like, yeah, I'll come work for you for like 30K? They're like, you don't even know what you're worth, so we're not going to bother. I've seen kind of both extremes. But how do you deal with your own salary expectations? I think, general advice would be look at your cost of living where you live. And I would ask the company, like, what are they paying other devs in your area? And what's the range for a particular area? Some companies are just flat rate, and they're like, we pay all of our devs X amount of dollars, no matter where you live across the country or elsewhere in the world. But some companies are like, well, if you live in this area, it's more expensive, so we're going to increase your salary. And if you live in that area, we're going to decrease your salary because the cost of living is lower. That can be a whole controversial issue in and of itself. There was a lot of talk with the quarantine, with everything going on last year, of all these big companies in the Bay Area. People are like, all right, I'm out of here. I don't need to live in the Bay Area. I can go live in Montana, and pull my Bay Area salary and buy like half of Montana and, work from there, making the bucks. And there were a couple of companies that got in some hot water. They're like, well, if you move out of the area, we're going to decrease your salary. And yeah, I never really paid attention to like what happened in that, whether they reversed that. Yeah. But
it turned into 40% attrition. It turned into 40% attrition. The industry as a whole is like, hey, y'all, come on back to the office. We're going to do region balancing of salaries. And then everyone just left. It's just like, I'm talking to people regularly who are like, yeah, I mean, we're losing like 30% a month, but I think we're going to make it if we just hire fast enough. And I'm like, you are definitely not going to make it. There's no way you pull up from that nosedive. It's not. Yeah. I'm a little bit upset because they stole the secret sauce. Like, my startup someday would hire without regional balancing, and in a remote environment. That was what Heroku did. We were able to hire people with 30 years of experience because they wanted to live on a farm in Virginia. They are by far the best engineer. They have the opportunity to live out there. And most companies in San Francisco are like, no, we're good. Or we're going to pay you what farmers make out there. Like,
wow.
It was nonsense. I'm glad it's dying.
Yeah. Peter, any thoughts?
There's also there's then the component of like restricted stock unit that contributes heavily to a lot of tech salaries, or total compensation, I guess I should say. And I feel like something I really wish we could, like, folks were more privy to and understood how it worked and how to model that, because I think at some companies you'll see base salaries might look relatively low, but where you're really seeing the total comp is on the stock packages. So learning as much as you can about that, so that when you're in that negotiation situation, how to tweak the respective dials to meet your needs, be prepared for that.
Yeah. One thing that kind of drove, one thing that really drove me in my career decisions, as far as like my salary ask, is like, are my base core needs met, and then like increase it a little bit for lifestyle kind of thing. But I've never wanted the kind of job where you're making like $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, like base salary, like stock options above and beyond that. But like, you hear these stories of like, oh, so-and-so got this job and they like, or got a whole bunch of job offers and started sort of pitting them against each other. Next thing that you know, they're fresh out of school and they got like a $300K job. It's like, I would fear for a job where I'm making that much money, because I place a lot of value on what my time is worth. And if someone's paying me that much money, like, psychologically, I think it would bother me of like, oh, I'm making a lot of money, am I really contributing X dollars per day worth of value to that company? Because they want to typically see like 2.5 to 3 time return on that investment that they're making in you as far as the salary goes. So I mean, that's my own experience. So I've always tried to keep my salary sort of band where, like, within a certain kind of range where it's not like extravagant salary. But when you get into like stock options, like Peter brought up an interesting point about like RSUs, like if the company's already public, great. But if they're not public yet, I mean, here's your stock options, right? Like, let me give you unlimited stock options. This is about all
so
it's
much
worth,
stock.
right?
Yeah.
So much stock. Here's part of your compensation.
We're
package.
actually hiring interns for tech interview prep right now, and we'll give you a whole box of stock options when you join.
That's right.
There's no salary.
Right.
Yep.
But I mean, I've certainly gone on interviews. One of my favorites was, well, we can't pay you a salary to come build the software, but we're going to pay you in stock. And I'm like, I can't pay my rent in stock, so that's no good to me. So there has to be some balance of, are your core needs being met? Like, are you able to pay your bills and pay your rent and take care of your obligations and have, you know, enough for like the savings account and the emergency fund and like put some money in retirement and then lifestyle above and beyond that to where you're comfortable. I think that's kind of where I would sort of determine my salary needs. Everyone's going to be a little different though. I know some people that just want to chase a buck, and that's fine too. Everyone's got a different outlook on life and what they feel they deserve and need. And I think Dota brought up a good point. Like, salaries are all over the place. I mean, even, you know, some companies, like when they make you an offer, you negotiate, and suddenly your offer comes in different than someone else who applied and got a similar job. And this is where we start getting these pay gaps and pay discrepancies and so on. And that can lead to a whole other topic of discussion around like just the equity and the equality of the hiring process and the offer process. And I actually know some companies in the Denver area specifically who say, when we make you an offer, all of our new graduates, they all get the exact same pay. They get the exact same starting compensation package. Once you're in the company, then you can prove to us that you're worth more. And then when it's time for your annual review, you can negotiate higher as long as it's warranted internally. But everybody starts at the same point because they want that salary to be equitable. And they don't want to say, well, just because you negotiate and someone else didn't, you make more money. Like, that seems weird. And I actually have a lot of respect for companies that do that for those entry-level positions. Like, everybody starts at this wage, and you can increase from there. Like, once you get in and you prove yourself and you prove that growth, we're happy to increase that for you. I think that's a better plan. I think that allows for a lot more equity, not equity like stock equity, but just equality in pay. You know, any thoughts on that, folks?
Similar, similar philosophy to one of the FANGs I was at that streams a lot of video, and their salary philosophy was, what's this person worth based on their experience, talent profile and whatnot. And they had, high level categories, and what is the top salary that person could earn in this area. Specifically, it was the Bay Area, and boom, that's their salary. They go for the top just to attract the best talent. And it took negotiation sort of off the table because they were pretty much paying these folks what would be considered the highest for that market.
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about this, and I'm not necessarily sure that I agree. I've argued with people about this for years, but I teach code school students how to negotiate their salaries. Like, that is my primary means of engagement around code schools. I give a talk all the time called Salary Negotiation and why you should negotiate, not just for yourself, but for your peers. And I have almost universally found the companies that say, well, everyone starts at the same salary to be giant liar faces. All of them.
Really? Interesting.
I have repeatedly heard from people getting hired into these organizations about people who get turned away during the hiring process, or people who end up coming in with a signing bonus or a little bit more stock or a little bit more salary in a company that provides total transparency. I agree with you that don't negotiate your salary. Like taking salary negotiation off the table is awesome if the company is totally open book about it. Here's the salary, here's what we're going to pay people who enter this scene. But most of the time, they actually don't. They work behind the scenes to kind of fiddle the knobs when it serves their needs. And when it serves their needs is when they feel like they found a particularly attractive candidate that is absolutely directly influenced by personal biases all the way across the board. So given that most companies don't do that and don't provide that level of transparency, I advocate for people to negotiate their salaries, because in negotiating your salary, you are standing up not just for yourself and your own value, but for the value of your peers. The next person who comes along and has to negotiate their salary in order to be paid fairly, because they are, historically underprivileged population, right? They have historically been excluded from these kinds of spaces. They are going to be offered less money consistently. There is a lot of data about that online. I don't feel like I need to prove that to you. People who sit at intersections of those groups, even more so. And those people coming into a salary negotiation also have a much higher rate of being turned away. I've given the talk to thousands and thousands of people over the years. And maybe out of a dozen or 24 stories I've heard of people being turned away, not a single one of them was from a majority group. Not a single one. Is all people who, for one reason or another, have been historically excluded from these kind of tech spaces. And I'm not okay with that at all, right? I keep a list of those companies privately. I don't share it publicly because that's not really my style. But I remember, and I'm paying attention. And if you turn someone down for negotiating the salary, I will burn you down behind the scenes. Negotiation should be normalized, and negotiating all the time helps normalize it. If you really are engaged with a company who can prove it, your answer to like, hey, we pay everyone the same is show me receipts. Let me see. I want to know. I'd like to talk to the team, and I'd like to actually ask them, because otherwise you're walking into some dangerous territory where we have repeatedly had companies in the Portland area just straight lie to people. Like, they would blog about it. Oh yeah, we pay 65 for every single one of our entry-level engineers, and I talked to someone there who got 95 out of the gate, another person who got an offer for 40 at the same role. Right? Totally unacceptable behavior and deceitful. But I think we kind of agree and disagree on that point.
Yeah, the two companies that I can think of in Denver, because we actually got to see the offer letters that the students from Turing got, we were actually be like, oh yeah, they are actually getting the exact same compensation package. So yeah,
you had the advantage of knowing.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, show me the actual offer. Like, show me, like, prove to me that this is what's happening, and not just like, oh yeah, this is totally what we pay everybody, and end up like trying to lowball you. I mean, not to defend companies that do that. My job as a manager is to pay you as little as possible to come and work for me and get the job done, right? I've got budget, and I've got people to answer to for that budget. So it's not necessarily that I'm lowballing you for a personal reason. It's just I've got a budget, and I'm trying to like keep that budget low so that I can maybe hire more people. But yeah, I agree. You absolutely need to negotiate for yourself, advocate for yourself, because other people are not going to. And so yeah, I also agree. Like, negotiating is absolutely important, and I think having some negotiation skills would be fantastic on that. Definitely check out Jonan's stream. I'm sure he'll bring that up at some point.
I should just have a stream where I just talk about salary for like 8 hours, because I won't shut up.
Right?
I love salary.
That's great.
Well, just to wind up that time, I'm curious, like, so companies that do offer that, hey, we pay everyone the same type line, what accountability mechanism would actually work? I'm just thinking about how, like, if you want to make that statement and then you want to hold some accountability there, what would really, I mean, other than just like you mentioned, reconciling two offer letters from two candidates as a proof mechanism, I'm just curious, what else could be done there to create that accountability? And sort of a rhetorical question.
People open their books. There are companies that just have a page online. They're like, here's what we pay for each position. And hiring on my team, I'm very fortunate to have been able to create pay equity, because DevRel is a small industry. It becomes very clear to people if they're not being paid the same amount of money, because you talk to all the other DevRels and you find out right away. There is a spreadsheet that exists in our hallway track for DevRel people, and somewhere it would say Senior Developer Relations Engineer, New Relic, and if that number didn't match the very next line, there would be a problem. Like, one of those people is quitting. And so we had to achieve pay equity for our team. And when I have a conversation with someone about going to hire them, I just tell them what the position pays. I don't state it publicly in venues like this, because in that, like, unless you are coming to apply for the job, I'm just sharing the information publicly. that actually becomes me just like telling you what the people on my team get paid, which is kind of a crappy thing to do to them, especially without their permission. But during a hiring conversation, someone asked earlier, like, how do you bring up the salary? I expect people during the very first conversation to ask me what the salary range is for the position. And that's when I tell them, because I very often will do a thing almost as a joke with people where I'll be like, and what are your salary expectations for the role? And then you say, what is the salary range for the role? And then I say, here's the exact salary because we have pay equity. Like, that's my actual spiel that I use in the conversation, because they will always ask for a number. They are giving you the opportunity to shoot your own foot off. Never give them a number, ever. Ever, under any circumstances. Make up any story. With Jonan, what about if no, the answer is no, stop it. Don't give a number. Your only answer is, what is the salary range for the position? Well, what did you make at your last job? I have an agreement with my former employer that I won't share that information. I will, of course, extend the same courtesy to you.
And it's also illegal in some states for them to ask you that question, which I think is great too.
Exactly. So just, the answer is no. Don't tell them.
Lobby your local representatives to pass legislation to do it in your state too. I think it's fantastic. I think that question needs to get banned from an interview process. Sorry, Peter, go ahead.
What I was going to say, it segues into Colorado's recent legislation, which requires employers to publish salaries. Which I'll be honest, I didn't know that happened. I just loaded up some pages. I was like, wait, what? When did they start doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Not a popular choice. A lot of big companies are running for the hills because of that.
Yeah, and they're saying we won't hire remote workers from Colorado specifically because we don't want to publish the salary. And I think that's total BS and needs to get adjusted.
And also a super bad look. Who wants to go work for the company that is like admitting openly that they're just trying to screw people from Colorado? Like, why would I sign up to work for you? I get that you're mad about this law, but your butt is showing. Like, what are you doing? Why would you brag about it?
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Scrolling back. Let's see. Jen had another question for us. Let me see if I can find it. How do you feel about companies that give out inflated titles? Does that do a detriment to their employees looking for their next opportunity? I actually worked at one company where, like, you can give yourself whatever title you want on your resume. Just don't misrepresent yourself. Like, don't call yourself the VP of engineering or the CTO if, like, you're just, an individual contributor. But they're like, you can call yourself, like, master developer of chocolate chip cookies. Like, we don't care what you call yourself. Just, don't inflate your title and say, like, you were senior when you weren't. But, like, what you actually call yourself, we won't care. If anybody calls HR for a reference and says, did Ian work at that company in this capacity? They'd be like, yep. So, but other companies, like, are a little more rigid on, like, no, this is your title. This is how you need to represent yourself. What do you folks think about, title inflation?
I've seen a lot of lately folks from, like, financial technology. Well, I guess big banks, but working in sort of the tech departments of those, and they're all like AVPs, associate vice president, and it just seems a bit outsized for the contributions when you then review the resume. Like, clearly they were but they were a individual contributor, and it would suggest if they were a VP, they were more strategic and having broader influence and, like, really contributing to, like, the direction of the company. And then I find that their expectations are sort of outsized with wanting an equivalent role within a large FANG company, and there's just an incongruency there. An AVP at a large rank is likely going to land in, like, a senior role, and it's often a bit off-putting because the expectations are much higher.
Yeah. Any thoughts on titles, John?
I have a lot of thoughts on titles. I have a lot of thoughts on a lot of things. I wanted to point out that's the second time that we've said just individual contributor on the stream, and I feel like it's worth noting, like, how very distasteful that term is to me. Individual contributor. I think maybe a better term is, like, builder, and then, like, support staff of builders. It's like,
it's good.
My job only exists to help the builders do the building. Like, I am not actually producing tangible value. I'm walking around helping other people communicate with each other, organizing things, and approximately structuring the work they're already doing, framing it for other people to understand. But ideally, anyway, I have a lot of thoughts about that title, but titles, like, junior software engineer and senior software engineer. I would be willing to bet that much like they did that study where they tasted wine at the Viticulture Institute in Italy, France, they did this thing where it was a university where they trained sommeliers. They took white wine and they put red dye in it, and they had it in a taste test with a bunch of other red wines, and people were like, this tastes like red. People whose job is to identify the wine. I've met junior engineers who far exceeded my expectations for senior level engineering candidates. And that leads me to believe maybe we just make it up. Get the titles, give the titles. Just slather the world in titles, because the thing that ends up keeping you out of your next job is looking around for places that are hiring junior. And you only look for those places while you have junior on your title. And then the second someone takes that off of your title, you stop looking for those jobs, and then you're applying for software engineer jobs. And look at that, the pool is that much wider.
Yeah.
I think it is important to help set expectations for people, and in companies that very rigidly follow like Radford levels or whatever leveling strategy people use, you can look up levels.fyi if you're listening at home and learn about what these levels are and like kind of common expectations in the industry. But I have a hard time believing that titles impart all that much meaning. I have learned, though, that when they say you can give yourself whatever title you want, they don't mean VP of Awesome. They would not give me VP of Awesome at my first tech job. Instead of apprentice software engineer, they're like, we aren't going to make you a VP of anything. But at New Relic, I am Space Wizard, technically. I have Space Wizard on my business cards. So that's nice, too.
Wonderful. Good deal. Danny asked a good question. If you can't find reasonably reliable salaries listed for a company that you're interviewing with, how can you figure that out? I think networking is a really good option there. Like, as you get to know people in the company before you even apply there, straight up ask them, like, what are the salaries at this company? Like, what's the discrepancy between different levels, different roles? See if they know. Talk to the recruiter and say, like, what's the pay range? You can absolutely ask those questions. But I think a lot of the networking that comes involved in company research and getting to know the company, and I'm going to do a whole thing on Sunday around company research and how do you even like find information about companies. So tune in Sunday. But I think that you can find a lot of that just from getting to know people and talking to them and say like, hey, like, do you mind giving me like a range of, what you make at that company if I were in a particular kind of role, or if I was coming in as a junior, like, do you have any idea like what I might make in that kind of role? That's what networking is all about. Or as Jonan would call it, making friends. Yes. I think that's actually a better term. So Jonan just mentioned that on his stream last night. He's like, don't call it networking, call it making friends. Because that's really what you're doing. You're building friendships and relationships in the industry with other people, getting to know them, and sort of building up that rapport so that you can ask those kinds of questions. Because that's the only way you're going to find that kind of thing out. I would say find someone on LinkedIn that works at that company in what would be kind of a peer equivalent role. If you're a senior dev, find another senior dev. If you're a junior entry-level dev, find another entry-level dev and get to know them. Also, if you're entry level, like try to find other folks at slightly higher levels. Find an intermediate, find a senior level role, or go to levels.fyi and look at the different, like, software engineer 4, like, what does that mean? Try to figure out where you would land on those ranges and find other people at those companies at a peer level and talk to them. What's it like to work there? What would the salary range be? Because they probably know. They probably have some semblance of idea there. Or you could even ask them, like, did you negotiate your salary when you interviewed and got your offer there? Like, what was that negotiation process like? Did they push back a lot? Or, you can ask those questions. The worst that'll happen is they won't tell you. But I think that as you build up that rapport and get to know them, they're going to be more trusting with their answers. I think that's how these things work in the industry. We talk. Managers know that we talk. And as much as they may say, well, sign this non-disclosure agreement, it's like, try and hold that up in court.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to talk about my salary all day long. Like, there's nothing you can do to stop me from talking about my salary and my RSUs and like whatever. Like, nothing can stop me from sharing that information. except with the next recruiter at the next job that I'm going to go talk to. Sorry, I signed an NDA. I'm not supposed to talk about it.
I can't share that. Yeah.
Right.
I'd say though, on the, when making friends though, consider when you ask that question though, especially if someone has been at a company that, for a long time and has had their RSUs for a long time, they're likely making a considerable higher amount than someone who would enter, because there hasn't been time for sort of that appreciation of the stock package. So but it's still directional and helpful.
That's the kind of thing that large companies will do to cuff you in case you don't understand this yet about the industry. You come in at a salary. Let's say I go to work for Google and I get a salary of like 200,000, and you're like, hey, that doesn't sound like all that much money, but you don't realize that there's actually like $400,000 or $500,000 in RSUs behind it. Those are reserve stock units that effectively convert into cash as soon as they vest at 1 year, instead of options, which are tissue paper. So I get to the end of my first year, and now I've got this 400,000. We'll say I get an extra bonus 100 grand. Boom. That I can straight convert into my bank account, right? Treat it as normal income. There's $100,000 extra that I just got. So now my income is 300,000. But at 1 year, because I'm only vesting 1/4 of my $400,000 package at 1 year, my boss comes to me and is like, you know what, Jonan, you did a great job. We're going to drop another 400 on you. And then if I stay another year, now I made 200,000 extra. And then if I stay another year, it's 300,000 extra, and so on and so forth. And you end up in situations where you're working at major corporation and you're like, wow, if I can just last 1 more month, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can do it. It's so much money though. That's like all of college and another house. Can I just 1 more month? And think about, do you want to spend time in a place in your career where you're trying to decide between 30 days of suffering or $500,000? Because you can someday find out if you go work for one of those corporations that does this. That's exactly why they do it though, because they know
that also happened. That also happened with ISOs, incentive stock options, when like Uber and Lyft were getting started and raising like tens of billions of dollars in funding. People that started really early, had just tons and tons of stock options, but because the value went up so drastically and so quickly, if they were to actually exercise those options, actually buy those options, they would have had to immediately turn around and give the IRS like millions of dollars, but they would have been worth like tens of millions or more. But they would have had to pay the IRS a chunk of money up front. And it's like, I can't afford to. No one's going to give me a loan to buy stock options that may go down in value later. And so they felt trapped. It's like, do I leave the company and walk away from potentially tens of billions of dollars? Do I stay in this super toxic environment? Like engineers at Uber especially, we're having a really hard time trying to decide, do I stay or do I bail, because of, just the work environment, but also because of the equity that we're sort of like handcuffing them literally to their desk. And so it's tricky business for sure. Yeah.
Uber was a trash fire for a while there. It would have been a real hard place to stay. But when you're looking at like maybe $1 million or $2 or $3 million, it becomes a much more difficult decision. And that's exactly why they set that up. And in many of these stock arrangements, they've actually arranged things such that when the time comes that the company's about to go public, the investors and the founders make all their money and you end up getting screwed because they water down your shares. And there are a bunch of like complicated ways that tech workers can be exploited, as long as you have anything other than RSUs, which is why we advise you to treat those like tissue paper. They may pay off if you get real lucky, but mostly the chef at Facebook becoming a multimillionaire, mostly that story doesn't happen anymore.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Or the way they generally refer to it as the golden handcuffs, I believe.
Yeah. And I'm not dogging it. Like, that's actually a brilliant strategy. You can make quite a lot of money, and if you land on the right team, you can do very fulfilling good work. It's just that, like, you have to consider, as Ian was pointing out earlier, like, now if they're paying $1 million to do this job, why do they have to pay someone $1 million? They're like, your job is face punching. We get to punch you in the face all day. We had a question in the chat.
Peter, do you have time for one more chat question?
Are you out?
I do.
Okay, great.
All right, awesome. So Cole asked a good question for job postings. How much do I take into consideration the company's wish list? Seems every software engineer position wants 3+ years experience. Do they really mean it or not really mean it? Do some of them mean it? How do I tell the difference? That job posting is my Christmas wish list. This is what I hope to find in an engineer. I'm not going to get everything on that list. I already know that as a manager. If I happen to find that mythical unicorn that actually has all those traits, or they're probably lying on their resume.
Yeah. I'm going to be like, then I suspect they're lying. Yep.
Right. But here's the thing. Statistically, men, specifically white men, they're like, YOLO, I'm just going to go apply for that job. I meet like 20% of that list. I'm just going to go ahead and apply for that job. Where women, minorities, other historically marginalized groups, they're like, oh, I only meet like 20% of that list. I'm not going to bother. Apply anyway. You never know. And I think as you network, as you outreach and talk to people at the company, you can say like, hey, I haven't got that much experience, but I'm really passionate about what you do. Here's why. Here's some projects, or here's why I've got some relevant experience that I think could really help your company. They may make a change and say, yeah, okay, that's fine. We'll interview you anyway, not having 3 years experience. I think bringing that passion and that interest can move mountains. But Peter, let's start with you. What do you think about that?
I seldom reconcile a resume against the requirements like that. I agree totally that it's a wish list, and largely leveraged by like frontline recruiting teams who are doing sort of candidate pooling and whatnot. I love seeing ambitious applications, folks who are maybe not YOLOing, maybe they're being approaching it in a very different sort of sentiment. But I love seeing that ambition, and really enjoy talking to people who demonstrate that potential and know that they can do the job, but maybe don't exactly have the experience to back it up.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna have a chat. Yeah,
go ahead.
I was gonna say I'm actually gonna have a chat in 2 weeks. I've got 2 HR directors that are gonna come join the stream.
Nice.
And I'm gonna pin them down and be like, how do you screen candidates to hand them off to the engineering managers? They don't know that I'm gonna like hit them with that question yet, unless they watch the stream tonight. But I think that there can also be a discrepancy in what the recruiting team knows and understands about the role as they're going through those resumes and go, I don't think this matches, I'm going to throw it out. Like, how technically savvy are some of these recruiting teams to be able to properly screen, or to use these automated applicant tracking systems or ATS systems? And so I'm going to have a chat with them in a couple of weeks and find out, like, how does an ATS work? How does it actually screen our resume? How does it pull out these keywords? Like, I'm going to drill into some of that with them, and then say, okay, well, now that you've got that in your system, if I come to you and say, I need a Java programmer with 3 years experience, how are you screening those to give me a short list of like, here's 10 resumes for me to screen, and then like make phone calls and decide like who I'm actually going to interview? Because from hundreds of applications, they're going to whittle that down to like a dozen for me to look at. And of that dozen, I may call 5. And of that 5, I hope to interview 3. And of the 3, I hope to make an offer. But that's weeding out a lot of people along the way. And I was kind of joking on the dry run of the stream last night, is like there was a TV show, I don't know if it was The Office or Parks and Rec, where they're like, well, the first thing to understand is I don't hire unlucky people. And they take the first half of the stack and they dump it in the trash right away. It's like sometimes it feels like that. Like you apply for a job and like you have no idea why you didn't get picked. Like you think you've got the relevant experience. Sorry, Jonan, I kind of interrupted you there. You had other thoughts. I want to make sure we hear that too.
Oh, it's safe to say, Ian, that I have a lot of thoughts on any subject. So you have to be very careful giving me the floor. The thing with the resumes, like, look, you don't have a job today, right? Like, you're looking for a job. If you still don't have a job tomorrow, you lost none things. You don't make any of the shots that you don't shoot. So apply for the job anyway. I am putting together, in most cases, when I put together a job description, I'm like, all right, I want people who are good at these things. I want people who have strong communication skills, people who demonstrate that they are charismatic, people who can influence other people to understand their vision, right? Like, here are the things that I want. And then I handed it off to HR, and they're like, oh yeah, but the company has a policy that we only hire people with PhDs. So here's a bunch of other crap we're going to stuff in your thing. And I'm like, cool, because I'm just going to talk to who I want to anyway, and ultimately hire who I want to. And if you're doing a good job of generating your own pipeline, like, I consider hiring to be easily 90%, if not more, of my entire reason for existing at this company. Like, if I hire well, then I'm on cruise control the rest of the time. And I have really done an okay job, I think, actually. I have a fantastic team of people, and I will absolutely take credit for that part, because I don't really get credit for any of the rest of the work. They did all of that, right? but hiring people well is a skill that takes a lot of practice. And I would recommend that you read the book Who. You understand what it means when I say you should be hiring to values and you should be hiring to core competencies. Determine what is actually going to make a candidate successful to the role. Put your job description out there. Let HR crap it up a bit. Ignore the candidates that come in through that pipeline and go and find your own people. And I'm not talking about DMing your friends. I'm talking about posting on Twitter about a job, going and finding other groups that are specifically catering to segments of the population that have been historically excluded from tech, right? Like you can go find different Slack groups and different job boards online. And like I was, and when I first built the team, I was posting in Women Who Code Atlanta and all of the Women Who Code Slacks. I was posting online to look for neurodiverse folks. Like you really have to get out there and generate your own pipeline, because more often than not, your company is going to put it up on their website, and then they're going to put it out on Indeed and all of the other just garbage job boards that I hope you're not searching when you're looking for jobs, because you're going to find much better access to work by finding the right people on LinkedIn in your local area. Like if you go into the Portland tech community and you start researching the different managers, and then you start building out the circles around those people and who are they following and who are they following, and you will eventually find groups of people that are posting about these jobs and things. There were several people who work at startups here in Portland, especially like the recruiting team. One of them is Planet Argon. Planet Argon is a great consultancy. They have positions open every once and again, but the person who does their recruiting is regularly dropping giant lists of junior positions on LinkedIn and on Twitter, because then they become the source, right? Brilliant strategy. That's the person who's going to get to know a whole bunch of other people who are entering the industry, and they're going to make progress. The existing hiring process is broken, and it excludes people by design. So ignore those requirements. I pay them very little due. I think a lot of people do as well. I wrote my job description that I have out there right now is super weird, and I was lucky to sneak it past the censors in our case. I'm not like crapping on New Relic. They're great. They do a really good job over there. It's just that like a job description follows a particular format, and people are used to seeing it that way. And I think mine says like, you know, we're like vampires. We only go into that house when invited. Like the word vampires actually appears in the job description for my role in talking about DevRel. Like we'll talk about New Relic, but only if you really want us to and you ask, kind of thing. That's not a typical experience. Anyway, the long rant, short story, ignore it. Ignore it. It should be irrelevant in your decision whether or not to apply. If it's way out of if it's like, hey, we need a PhD and we need someone who's really experienced with nanotechnology. And you're like, I used to sell ice cream cones, but I started coding 3 months ago. Now, like, obviously, you know, right? Like, oh, I'm going to get into this job. They will immediately discover that I know nothing about nanotechnology and fire me, and it will just be bad times all the way around. Yeah.
Now I want ice cream. Awesome.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you both for the chat and the questions. Peter, do you have more time, or do you need to get going?
I got to go walk the dog.
Okay.
She's waiting.
Cool.
I need to go wash my hair and walk my. I don't have to do either of those things. I'm just pointing out what an obvious lie that was, Peter. But it's been nice meeting you and hanging out with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter.
I'll
Appreciate
show you a
hanging
picture
out.
of the dog waiting at the door for me.
Yeah, sounds good. All right. Well, we're gonna change views. Cheers, Peter. We're gonna change views here to me and Jonan. There we go. Jonan, while I got you on the call, the Unix utility for nice, when you re-nice an application, does negative give it more priority, or does positive give it more priority? I want to bump up the priority on OBS because the video keeps lagging. Everyone can hear the audio, but occasionally the video freezes.
I think positive.
Positive? All right.
No, I mean, I have a 50-50 shot and I have no idea. I would type man nice is what I would do.
Yeah, I tried that, and it just says this gives an altered schedule priority if an increment is given, it's used, but it doesn't really say like a positive or negative decimal integer is used to modify the scheduling priority, but it doesn't say like if you give it a negative priority that's more, or.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, debugging in production, as chat was pointing out. Yeah, we're gonna debug in production here. Let's see what happens if I. What's the worst that could happen? Anybody in the chat happen to know before potentially?
I think they are inversely related. It's like Z index, I think. I think it's inversely related. If you do it If you negative it, it is higher up. Like you have
That's
them
what I
in
think too,
rank
yeah.
order. Yeah, it's like 1, 2, 3, and then like -1 is like I reign supreme and I beat everyone. And then, but then you can go even negativer until you're like negative infinity times infinity, like you used to do on the playground.
Right.
I used to do that a lot. Yeah.
All right, well, let's see.
Oh yeah,
what
there's a
this
button you
does
can
for us.
hit that puts the processing through the GPU. If you are using a MacBook, that is less of a reality, which is the case with
Right.
your system, right? Yes.
Yeah, because I'm
in
on a
order
Mac.
to, yeah, in order to stream on a Mac and use the GPU, which would be lovely, you would need an external GPU. And
Right.
external GPUs on OS 10 only support
Spendy.
Radeon GPUs.
Yeah.
And I bought them. They were spendy. I bought them for the whole team. We have a whole fleet of 10 external GPUs
That's
for
great.
the whole streaming team, except that you can't do external encoding on Radeon GPUs. You must use the NVIDIA encoder specifically
Interesting.
for the version of OBS that runs on Macs. This is way too much streaming information for the average person. Moral of the story is, if you want to use a GPU to encode your streams, you've got to be using Windows.
Yeah. I'm probably going to move everything over to Windows over the weekend and not worry about the Mac anymore because this thing's lagging pretty hard.
Yeah, I would recommend it. It's a total hellscape. You're going to have a real bad weekend, but you should probably.
That's all right. What's the worst that could happen? Cool. Thanks. Appreciate Dota. Thank you for the info over chat as well. Appreciate that. All right. Well, let's do something fun, shall we? So part of what I want to do as part of the stream is get into some resume reviews. I've looked at probably 10,000 plus resumes over my career, screening a lot of them for actual jobs, as well as just helping folks get ready. A lot of coaching over the last 7 years, done a lot of technical coaching. And I've done a handful of resume reviews, even for some folks on the stream. And Jonan's also really good at resume reviews as well. So while Jonan's on the call, I actually want to share a resume that was anonymized and submitted through techinterview.guide/streaming. If you want to submit a PDF of your resume, I do ask if you're please be safe on the internet, anonymize your name, take out your contact info, or anonymize the phone number and email address and things like that. So the resume that we're going to look at is not the person's real name, not their real contact info, but they are a Turing student and they had some questions about the resume. And they were basically, the theme around what they were getting at when they submitted the resume was I'm not getting any hits. I'm submitting this as a resume and I'm not getting anywhere. I'm not getting through applicant tracking systems and so on. So I'm going to switch over to this view. And,
I'm going to take the opportunity to step out for one quick second and I'll be back.
Yeah, no problem. Sounds good. Thanks, Jonan. So while Jonan is away, I'm going to give kind of my first couple of impressions on how I do a resume review. And then when Jonan comes back, we'll kind of get his take as well. Again, want to preface all of this with opinions are like armpits. Everybody's got a couple generally, and some of them stink. So these are just my own opinions at my first glance at this. I have looked it over very, very briefly. But this is mostly unfiltered, just stream of consciousness as I go. I'm going to be doodling on it on the screen as we go and just talk a little bit about kind of the layout and so on. The first thing that I typically do when I'm helping someone with resume reviews, I zoom out and just kind of get an idea of the white balance on the screen. And the first things that really stand out for me, if I go into my drawing mode over here, is these giant white gaps, white space gaps. Right here in the middle. It's not drawing. Draw on the screen. There we go. These big areas right here. I think just tapping on there, I think we'll point that out. Having those big white space gaps, there's something to sort of pay attention to when someone's reading over your resume. What you have to be cognizant of is sort of how the eye is directed looking at things. And people that get into visual marketing, they know how humans read things left to right, top to bottom, and where they can sort of lead the eyes based on where they position things on the screen. And so when you get into a resume like this, basically what's happening is they're going to start reading here, and it's going to kind of come down here, and our eyes are always going to take the path of least resistance, which means they're probably coming down this way, and then they're going to be, oh, okay, well, let's then go over here. That's kind of the path my eye is going to take looking at this particular resume because of all the white space that we see right here and right here on the resume. And so the first thing I would encourage doing is squish these together a little bit more. I think you could probably have like a box about that big where you've got your skills in the middle. So just take those outer columns and bring them in, because then my eyesight, as my reading kind of comes down the page this way, I'm going to see that big block of text here in the middle, and I'm going to pay more attention to what's in that block of text. And then my eye is still probably going to go this way. The other thing too, when people are reading bullet points, they're only going to read the first 5 or 6 words of a bullet point. Just when you're kind of skimming things and you're looking over bulleted lists, you're only going to pick up the first 5 or 6 words anyway. And so having these bullet points on here, again, just from a very zoomed out point of view, your bullet points should never wrap. I generally recommend try to let these bullet points take up at most 2/3 of the width of the page. You never generally want to go much farther than that on the page. Anything longer than that, they're not reading it anyway. As much as people are like, I'm totally going to read every word on this resume, they start reading the top of the page really slowly, and then as they get kind of going on the page, they read faster and faster. And so there's a term in newspaper land, going old school. A newspaper is this long, big piece of paper that they would actually print yesterday's news on. So why they call it new, I don't know, because it's old, but they don't call them olds paper. Sorry, I got to throw a dad joke in there once in a while.
Nailed it.
Hey, Jonan, what's the best time of day to go to the dentist?
I don't know. What is the best time?
2:30.
2:30.
Oh,
knock, knock.
2:30. Who's there?
Europe?
You're a poo.
I am not a poo. That's rude.
That's great.
My favorite.
Yep. Yeah. So
heard that from my nephew the other day. He's 6. It's still good.
That's great. Yep. So yeah, I think Danny or Dota mentioned in chat, there's a term in newspaper land called above the fold. When you think about how they make newspapers, they would fold them kind of like this in order to put on, in the newspaper stand. And so basically what we're looking for here is everything in the top half of the page is more important. So everything up here needs to be the most eye-catching stuff that you want me to see. Needs to be in kind of this top half. And so one of my biases as a resume screener is I need to know in a hurry. I've got a job post where I've got job requirements and skills that I'm looking for. Do you have those skills? If I've got a hunt for that on this page, I'm going to throw it out and I'm going to move on to the next one. You need to make my life easy. I'm not that I'm lazy. I'm busy. I got maybe dozens or hundreds of these things to go through. And so I need to be able to spot in a hurry, do you have the skill that I'm looking for? And so one of my biases as an interviewer and as a screener, I typically don't even bother with the summary, and I like to see the skills and projects up here in this top half. That's just my own bias. I want to see in a hurry, do you have the skills? How have you used those skills? Cool, I'm going to call you. If your skills are at the bottom or your projects are kind of spread out all over the place, I'm less likely to sort of catch what you're trying to tell me. That's not necessarily true for everybody. Again, that's just my own bias as an interviewer. And so
I have thoughts about that, if I could interrupt real quick.
Please do. Yeah.
I don't believe in lazy. I believe in willpower. You have a finite amount of willpower in a day to spend. And you're right. You're not lazy. You're reviewing 100 resumes. If you give each resume 20 minutes, it's too many. You don't have the time or the energy. Your job in constructing a resume is to, as Ian stated, make it visually obvious which pieces of information are most relevant, and to put the details that Ian is going to get the time to read. Just assume that the person reading your resume or screening your resume is not going to read the whole thing. Try and make the most important points, the ones that match the job description, very, very clear and at the top above the fold, which is also the way that we design web pages. If it's not above the fold and I have to scroll to find it, I will mostly not read it.
Another a couple of things just from attention to detail sort of thing. I can see that this is a GitHub link. I can see this is a LinkedIn link. I can see that this is an email address. You could probably get rid of, these headings here. So I would probably drop like the email, the LinkedIn. Like I can see that that's what these things are. As far as the portfolio link goes, I think you could drop the header and just have the list of links over here. Now, when I look at this PDF, they're not all lined up exactly on that right margin, and there's also more white space in between these lines than the other three. And so it looks a little off, like visually. Some people, they won't be able to describe why it looks off. They're just going to look at that and go, something's weird about this resume, and they're going to pass on it. And so paying attention to layout can be important. It's not critical. It's not absolutely crucial, but it could make a difference. A couple other things, top to bottom. Location. Jonan, how do you feel about location on a resume?
I don't care because I only hire people for remote roles, but I know it does matter to some people that they want to know you're close.
Yep. Some companies will bias against you for geographic reasons if you are not present in their location. So if you're applying for a job in New York and you live in Denver, and they're like, well, we really want you to come work in our office. Now they've also got to make the decision as their screenings, like, oh, you're an entry-level dev. We're already taking a risk hiring an entry-level dev. Do I also want to have to pay to relocate you to New York? I'm going to put that on the back burner. And next thing you know, you don't get a call. So it can subject you to geographic bias. Not always, but it can be possible. Now, if you're looking for a job in Denver and you live in Denver, that's a really good way of showing me that you are local, especially if the area code of your phone number is not a Colorado area code. And so showing that you already live there can boost the confidence in that. So again, you kind of need to play that a little bit by ear. Also,
you're
going
playing
back
to your strengths. Put the part that's going to benefit you the most at the top, and if location is going to benefit you, then put it at the top.
Yep. Other attention to detail. I would bring this line all the way out to the edge. If you're going to line stuff up on this right margin, then line it up on that right margin. My drawing is horrible, but I would bring these dates out to where that right margin is, and I would bring this line out as well, and bring everything out to that same right margin going down the page. Someone asked in chat earlier when I was talking about 2/3 width on bullet points. They were asking, like, do you soft wrap there? And I would say no. That's a hard length limit. Like this bullet point, I would probably start the bullet back here, so that the bullet actually lines up with this, and get rid of this indent if you can. And then I would do like 2/3 of the width of the page and say that bullet point should probably stop somewhere around here. Maybe a little bit farther, but I wouldn't go much farther than that. Also, if you're putting dates on the resume, you generally don't want to put text sort of scrolling past those dates, because then these dates can be a nice isolated sort of pseudo column on their own as they're visually looking at your resume. And so that would be
we had a question in the chat.
Those things shorter. Yep, go ahead.
We have a question in the chat. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I also want to make sure people get their questions answered on time, or in a timely fashion at least. So Creature Nest asked about automated search, and Lunsford actually had a similar question that using the email labels and the GitHub and LinkedIn labels, Lunsford has heard that assists with the ATS readers. And Creature Nest says, does a resume go through automated search? Yes, that's what ATS automated. What is it called? ATS automated
system. Automated. It's Applicant Tracking System.
Applicant Tracking System. Applicant Tracking Systems use automation to determine if you meet the basic requirements for the role. And so these tricks, they could influence that. But Creature's question was actually, if so, what might get your resume higher or lower priority with the ATS?
That's a good question. I don't have a ton of information on that, and so in a couple of weeks when I get those HR folks on the stream, I'm actually going to pick their brain on, like, how does an ATS actually work? Like, how much do you know about how these things actually pick this stuff apart? There have been studies around making like an ATS friendly resume, but then see if you can like also submit another resume that's more human friendly, because they can be a little bit different. So trying to balance that can also be tricky. Like, do I submit something that's both ATS friendly and human friendly? Because if the ATS flags it and says this is a match, now a human's going to read it. And if it looks ugly, is the human going to bias against, well, the layout on this looks awful, but it made it through the system. So yeah, I don't have a good answer on that. I think that more information needs to be sort of brought to our attention kind of collectively. Like, how do these ATS systems actually work? How do they break these things down? So that's a fantastic question. I just don't have an answer.
My guess is they're terrible. Imagine like the worst possible implementation of that software. It's that, but probably worse than your worst dream of that thing.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind too is, like, humans write the algorithms for those applicant tracking systems, and so we're already inherently biasing we're sort of bringing our bias into what that applicant tracking system algorithm is even looking for in the first place. And so unless we're really well trained on how to eliminate that bias as we're writing those algorithms, again, it could skew results in particular ways based on how I'm telling the system to actually scan that document and pull those details out. So something else to think
it
about
may
there,
be
too.
as bad as like a simple regex that is like, okay, we want someone who has a 4-year degree from a university. So let's find the education section. And inside of there, if it doesn't say university and B.S. and computer science, if it doesn't say those 3 things. So if you write BS without the dots, or if your school that you went to doesn't have university in the name, then you were excluded by this thing. I'm guessing it's one of like the dumbest versions of that software as you can imagine, and exactly influence the biases of the people screening. That being said, you want to beat that system, so let's try and figure out, because I bet the hiring managers know.
Yep. Carmen, sorry, I'm not going to try to pronounce the last part of your username, but they brought up a great... Kalohe? Thank you. Jobscan.co is a great place to like submit your resume and have it kind of give you a guess on that kind of stuff. Jobscan's actually a really good site for that. So yeah, you can definitely go through that. So don't let the machines win. That's right.
Don't let the machines win. They already have so many advantages on us. I wanted to point out one more thing while we're talking about above the fold, that I often like a statement at the top, not just of like a summary of you as a candidate, but actually what you're trying to achieve with your career or what you want individually. And I'm not necessarily saying that my strategy is a good one in this case, but mine says, much like you have an H1 on a web page, mine says at the top, enthusiasm as a service. Says that across the top of my resume. So when people look at it, they're clear, like I'm setting expectations on what it is, how it is that I came to exist as a human, and like what value I offer the company. And then after that, I am seeking a position where I can live in and work as my whole self, and on and on and on, right? I haven't looked at my resume in a while, because once you get a little later on in your career, it matters less and less. More often you end up being like, can you just like print my LinkedIn? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Can you upload a resume? You're like, nah, you can print my LinkedIn if you really care.
Yeah, let me just export my LinkedIn as a PDF, and I'm going to upload that. It's like 20 pages long. The other thing that I'll mention, when I coach people on cover letters, for example, I typically tell people, okay, your cover letter needs to be 3 paragraphs. The first one's introducing yourself. The second one is telling me about the skills that you have that are relevant to the job. And the third one is why you want to work at the company and why you think my company's awesome. And then I tell folks, summarize each of those paragraphs into 1 sentence each, and that becomes the summary on your resume. So now your resume and cover letter are very tied together. Because you're going to customize that cover letter for the job, you should also be customizing the resume for that job as well. And I think it's a good way of like tying those things together. So if you can summarize like a bit of an intro, a bit of like the skills you bring and why you're interested in that company and get that on the resume, I think that's a good selling point.
I think you end up, very often people feel like that's like a huge time commitment. Like, why do people want cover letters? Why am I committing so much time and energy to this thing? If you're applying to so many places that you don't have time to actually do research on the company, I don't think you're going to have much success anyway. You should be applying to fewer people in a more focused way. You've done the research.
Quality over quantity.
You want to work there. Yeah.
Quality over quantity. Absolutely. And I will say, so historically in the past, I actually looked up statistics on this. Recruiters in the past, like, and by past, I mean recent past, like less than a year and a half, 2 years ago, two plus years ago. Historically, statistically, only about a third of recruiters even read a cover letter. Now with the pandemic and everything going remote, people have a little more time for these things, and that actually increased to now where recruiters, I read a stat, it's more like 70 to 80% of people are reading the cover letters. And so it's worthwhile. It's definitely like, worst case, you wasted like a couple of minutes, piecing the thing together. But when it comes to resumes and cover letters, I'm also a big fan of like just making kind of a generic form and then like, tweak it here and there and be able to submit it. When it comes to a resume, Jonan, I got a riddle for you. How do you make a sculpture of an elephant?
I don't know.
You start with a giant block of concrete and you chip away everything that doesn't look like an elephant. So when it comes to applying for a job, if you start with a really big resume, you list every skill, every project, every job you've had, lots of bullet points, that's kind of like your main sort of primary copy. When you go to apply for a job, you make a copy of that and you trim it back down to one page that makes you look like the best applicant for that job. You're going to rearrange the skills into the order that they're looking for in their job post. So for example, Danny and Nan here, I look at this and go, okay, well, they have React listed first and then JavaScript, Motykowski and so on. And HTML way over here on the right side. If I'm reading these lists like top to like when I read a bullet list like this, I'm going to read it top to bottom, left to right, not left to right, top to bottom. And so if I see HTML way over here on the right, that makes me think you know HTML less than you know React. And so you need to like shift the order of these things when you go apply for a job. So if you know multiple programming languages, and let's say I'm looking for a Python developer who knows JavaScript, and you're primarily a JavaScript developer who's dabbled in Python, you're going to put Python first on that list and put JavaScript second. And the first project you show me on that resume better be a Python project, because you want to look like a Python developer who knows JavaScript, even if you're actually a JavaScript developer who knows Python, because it gives a different impression about who you are and what you know. You can always sell them once you're on the phone. Now you're selling them on, okay, I actually know JavaScript better, but I do know Python. Here's a project that I built. Here's how I'm going to transfer the skills from one to the other. And now you get to sort of sell that in yourself. And so by starting with that really long format resume, trim it back down to one page to where you look like the best applicant for that job. And so you'll rearrange these things, for each application. And so again, like Jonan was saying, spend the time, do your outreach, do your networking, find out what it is they're really interested in, what they really want to know about you, and get that stuff on the resume, because that's where you're going to shine.
Just someone posted in the chat, we had a question that was, do you need a summary when you have no room after putting all relevant experience, projects, etc.? I would argue
it's the first thing to go.
You think the summary is the first thing to go, because if you read my reply here, my reply was, I care more about the summary than whatever else you have that's taking up that space. I want that thing. The long list of bullet points here, like looking at this thing, do I care that they know HTML? If they know React and they know JavaScript, they know HTML.
Some of these are going to be a given. I know that. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
CSS, there are agile workflow, a lot of these things in here I would expect from the rest. If you have Git and GitHub as separate items, like, well, one of those is a company, and like mentioning vendor products on there is like kind of like saying I use Adobe Photoshop and I use Adobe Illustrator and I use Adobe Premiere, right? It's like you're clearly filling the space. I think the summary is an opportunity for you to stand out, or a summary or objective. I actually prefer an objective. Summary is like, here's a summary of me as a candidate. Objective is like what I'm trying to accomplish in this industry and why I want to do it there. And I care more about that very human, carefully tailored couple of sentences than I do about the rest of the resume. But
everyone's different.
Reviewed far more resumes than I have. So
but everybody's different. And Ian. No. Again, it like don't shape your resume just on what I think and what I want. I mean, if you're going to apply for a job at the company I'm working at where I'm hiring, then tailor the resume to what I'm going to look for. But you don't know what they're going to be looking for when you apply. And that's why I love having Jonan help me pick this apart, because we're going to give you different perspectives and different opinions. I think a lot of things in tech are a little bit like politics and religion. Like, you may think a certain way, and as you hear other perspectives, you're going to sort of reshape your perspective on things. And I think this kind of thing is also really helpful. I don't like a summary, Jonan does. So, where do you take it from there? Which one is right? They're both right. Like, they're both right to different degrees. Some companies are going to care about things more than others. And again, I think that's where the networking and things like that can really come into play. Like, hey, when you apply for that job, did you put a summary on your resume? Like, ask those people those kinds of questions. I'm going to go into all that company research stuff on Sunday, so tune in Sunday.
I have to,
but for me,
go ahead.
I was going to say, for me, if you need space on that resume, the first thing to go is the summary. That's just my opinion.
I have to point out that I'm not giggling at what Ian is saying, but Carmen puts in the chat, I know HTML, how to meet ladies. Thank you, Carmen, for your perspective. Please don't ever put that on a resume.
Right.
Nothing about dating experience or how to meet ladies on your resume. I wanted to ask you, Ian, what order you think things should go in. Like in a normal layout, you've got like, okay, so let's take this as an example. Let's say that you're going to have sections that are summary, skills, education, projects. How do you think those sections should be ordered? And should there be a hobby section that only says karate? Go.
And also I just want to point out, Nikki had a great comeback in the chat. I know how to meet llamas. I think that's way better.
Nice. I like that one better.
So when we kind of come back to this idea of above the fold, when I'm scanning a resume, like I'm reading a lot slower at the top of the page, and my reading speed picks up by the end. That's just my natural tendency as a reader. I'm going to like pay a lot of attention, and so I need to see that vital information up top. And so for me, I like to see skills first and then projects. I want to know what you know and how you've practiced that. Now, if you've been in the industry long enough, you don't need projects on your resume anymore. Your work experience is going to speak to that. But if you're new in the industry, I would put some projects on there, because it's important to show me how you've used those skills, and not just these are the skills I've learned and this is the education place of where I learned the thing. For some companies though, and I did a fireside chat with Aileen Lerner from interviewing.io a couple of weeks ago at Turing, where she was saying like, yeah, a lot of companies still care about like the pedigree of the school that you went to. So if you got Stanford on there, that needs to be top of the resume. Like I went to Stanford, or I went to MIT, or I went to Georgia Tech, because some companies care about where you went to school more than the skills you have, partly because they have a trust in, what those schools teach. But there's also a lot of inherent bias. Like I went to MIT, so I'm only going to look at resumes that, of other people that went to MIT. Well, now you've already biased your interview candidacy pool as far as like who's going to like even make it onto your desk. If that's the first thing you're telling HR, like go find me all the resumes from MIT and then screen them from there. Like hopefully no HR person in their right mind is going to be like, yeah, totally do that. But there are people that are biased around those kinds of things. Or going back to what Jonan said earlier, like companies that require a bachelor's degree in computer science is like, the job is for a React developer. Why do you need a CS degree? Yeah, there are some CS things that are important to know, like efficiencies and so on, because if you write horrible JavaScript, you're taking down my whole browser, which can slow down my whole laptop and everything else I'm trying to do. And so, I'm browsing your webpage and my Spotify app starts stuttering because, my fan's kicking in and whatever, because you wrote a really bad algorithm. But I think like there's no hard requirement. You don't need a bachelor's degree to do 90% of the job that we do as developers for a lot of kinds of roles, especially web development. Like a CS degree is really not necessary. And I've worked at companies where our VP of engineering is like, no, everybody must have a bachelor's degree in computer science to even apply. It's like, why? You're biasing everything from the get-go and you're losing out on a ton of good people. I'll get off that soapbox. So as far as the order of things, I like to see, me personally, skills, projects, education. If you're new to the industry and you don't have experience. If you have experience, skills, and then relevant work experience. And if it's only a little bit of work experience, maybe throw a project or something in there, and throwing your education on there is also good. A couple of things I do know about applicant tracking systems, there's a preference in a lot of ATS systems to just have a single column format. If you do a 2-column format, the ATS systems tend to bias the right column for content and the left column for less important content. And so your contact information could maybe go down that left side, but like your projects and skills need to be on the right side. If you make a skinny right column and like the left side of the page is wider, applicant tracking systems are not going to track you well. And so there are things around those kinds of things to keep in mind when you're formatting a resume. And so I would say if you're going into an automated system where they're like, apply online, send us your resume, you probably want like a single column format. It's going to be a lot easier for the ATS to pick up the keywords and so on. So if you've got experience, show me your skills, then show me the experience, because the experience then is, and I would bold kind of the keywords of like what correlated to that skills block at the top, like in your experience of like, I said I know Python, here's where I've used Python on the job. I know, React, here's where I've used React on the job. I want to see a correlation of those things. But if you don't have experience in the industry yet, or if you're new, which a lot of folks on the stream are probably new in the industry, you're not going to have that experience yet. And so I would want to see skills and then projects, and then where you learned those skills, and did those projects. If you've got side projects, that's fine too. I'm less concerned about, was the project for school or was it a side project? I'm less concerned about that. I just want to know, like, how have you exercised these skills? Like, where have you actually learned or used these skills? Not just that you've learned it, how have you actually used that skill? Because that's going to come into play in my interview process. I'm going to want to like hear more about, oh, tell me how, like, what sort of roadblocks did you run into when you tried to implement such and such, or how did you work around, something in your code, like a bottleneck or something like that. Jonah, what do you think about sections and layout and so on?
I have to admit I lost the thread a little bit, but we're talking about where the various pieces should land in the ordering here. So I was reading along in the chat. Dota asked so much real estate spent on bullet points for not relevant jobs, and I was like, oh, do I have thoughts on that? But I'll get to that in a moment. So the sections of skills and education, I would typically put education at the bottom. I would put a skills section that should be really short. Many of the things that are listed here could be in one line, like React, Vue, Redux, that's a bullet point. Like pairing and Agile, that's a bullet point. Git is a bullet point, HTML, CSS. Okay, cool. Oh, and test-driven development. If you're using Motykowski, you're using test-driven development. That's good. Do that. You don't
I would
really
take GitHub
need
off the resume myself.
Yeah,
I don't
GitHub
think
shouldn't be on there.
GitHub's not a skill. Yeah.
Yep. It's like putting Microsoft Word on there. Do you type in Word documents or do you specifically use Microsoft Word? You're actually like indicating that you don't have experience with GitLab or using Git from a command line. Maybe you're only using a GitHub UI. It's redundant and unnecessary just to put GitHub on there. The other piece, so I would put education at the bottom. I would put projects above my experience, my work history. And in the projects section, I would talk about the very relevant technologies that were unique that I used on each one. On this one, I used React. And on this one, I used Vue. And on this one, I used Redux or whatever these things are that you put in these technology descriptions, and then describe briefly what the thing was as though you were explaining it to someone in a crowded bar at a conference and you only had a moment of their attention. Don't give all of the unnecessary detail, like, and technically interesting that you built, and be very, very brief about the projects. But then under the experience, you're talking about the specific things that you worked on at that company. At New Relic, I built a team of 10 people and launched developer relations and blah, 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 right? These are the things that I did. So like when you go to the experience section, that's where you can highlight those things. Now, I think knowing that this person's resume, this is their first job in tech, I think the experience section is both necessary and relevant regardless of what it contains. I often advise people to include experience from other things because it gives you flavor as a human being. It helps me to understand who you are. If I'm reading my own resume and I see like poker dealer and hotel concierge and bouncer and fence post digger, like then I have something to talk about. You've given me the icebreaker and I'm like, wow, that is a weird work history. Let's talk about that thing, right? You give someone an icebreaker with your experience. This is totally fine. If you haven't had any experience in tech, what you were telling me with your Trader Joe's thing is that you have customer service experience, which is actually directly relevant to customers or to communication skills in the software environment, right? You're a fellow or a what is it, Life Together Career Navigator, Care Navigator, Core Navigator. I can't read that; it's too small on my screen. But the whatever
Care
those
Navigator,
Care Navigator, right? Those bits of experience are relevant if that's all that you have to put there. Now, obviously, your tech roles should push these off. Your experience should never contain more than really 3 roles, I think. I listed 4, my mistake. Keep 3 things in here. And then at the very bottom, you put hobbies, karate. Just like that. And like a little fist emoji. Or a drawing of you kicking a board.
I'm not so much for the emojis on the page or hobbies. But
or the drawing, like the paint drawing of me kicking a board, like a little cartoon
probably
Jonan.
not. Definitely don't want like a headshot on there. Now, if you're applying for a job in Europe where they want like the full blown CV, then yes, include a headshot. They actually want to see what you look like. But for a North American resume, no headshot. You don't need
Yeah,
like a
how
big
could that go
logo
wrong?
with initials and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, again, you're
That's
gonna
so
bias
dumb.
them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. Sweep the leg, Johnny. Um, the other thing, just little things to pay attention to, like here for Rasta de Cristo, you've got like a white space before the second bullet point. Like those kinds of things stand out of like for a human reader going, oh yeah, they missed that. It's like an attention to detail. I'm a big fan of not using the vertical bar for reading. It's actually very interruptive to read and you come across this vertical bar. It's like my brain comes to a screeching halt. So I typically tell people like, don't use a vertical bar as a separator. Either use a comma or just leave it as white space. But I generally would avoid using that vertical bar, just myself. I like that you've got links on here. I like that you have, like, going back to your projects for a sec. I really like that this person has both a link to GitHub as well as a deployment for that project. Because that tells me not only can you write code and get it on GitHub, you actually can write something that's a working application that I get to experience. I don't have to go through your GitHub to hope I can find a link to see that you've actually deployed this somewhere. Now you've shown me that not only can you write an app, you can deploy it, you can make it live, you can take care of it and sort of manage it from there. I think that that's a really good trait to show. And so
test
I
your
like
links.
yeah, test them, make sure they work for sure.
Why does third project have a dash? I have to keep interrupting you, Ian, because sometimes you don't breathe when you get excited about resumes. Project. Yeah, well, I apologize for interrupting, but I'm going to keep doing it.
It's all good. That's okay. They called it third project, which is interesting too. So, sorry, this was just anonymized. This is just anonymized. So they actually took out the real names of their projects. Which is fine.
Okay.
Yeah, but I do like that for the projects. For the projects, they're actually highlighting the tech skill. I would typically put the tech that you used in the project in a second bullet point. I want, like, for me, one thing that I think stands out really nicely on a resume, make that first bullet point about the user. Why did you build this for a user? Who is this for? What are they doing on the website? Why did you make this? Tell me about the user experience. Tell me something about, like, users can create like a movie viewing kind of calendar event, and then tell me in a second bullet point what that tech stack was. But if you kind of hook me on that, I think that's like I liken it a little bit to like an elevator pitch for VC funding. Like if you're like, Jonan, you got oodles of money. I created this really awesome React app that uses HTML and the fetch API and CSS and ding, and they leave the elevator. They have no idea what I built.
Yeah, the sentence is backwards. The part at the end is what you want. Allows users to collaborate.
Tell me up front.
Yeah.
What is this for? Yeah. What's it for? Yeah. And then tell me the tech stack after that, because the tech, from the passion and the project and that side of things, it tells me that you really care about the user. You care about what that user experience was, why you built it, who it's for. That shows me a lot more about your passion as a developer, that you care about the user. Yeah, maybe these were school projects, and so maybe you kind of have to fudge it a little bit and try to talk about like, why you actually built it the way that you did. But like, I think it shows a stronger user empathy by putting that as your first bullet point, and then the second bullet point can just be a comma-separated list of the tech, React, comma, JavaScript. Although JavaScript kind of implies React, I can't write Python for React, and so. Again, I think you can take out the redundancies here and just say React, fetch API, CSS. I think that's really all I would need to see on here. As far as
someone recommended, Dota recommended using dates on the projects. Says might want to put dates on the projects, but I don't know. I feel like the projects stand on their own as almost like timeless representations of things you are capable of. They may not be relevant directly anymore. They may not have ever fallen into broad use. They're still just cool to have up there.
Well, the follow-up point. Yeah, sorry. The follow-up point in chat is like, was this a 3-month project, a 6-month project? I think if you've got the work experience, you're not going to have a project section. You're probably not going to have a project section. You're just going to tell me about the things that you built on the job, and your experience is going to take the place of the projects. I think if you're just coming out of school, or you're still relatively new in the industry, like maybe like only a year of experience, you're probably still going to have projects on the resume, at which point, like, again, it doesn't really matter when you made it or how long it took to make. At Turing, for example, I know a lot of these projects were done in 1 week or 2 weeks. Is it really important that the employer know that on the resume? Probably not, but it's a great selling point. Like, hey, did you check out that project I made? I made that in 2 weeks. And they're like, whoa, you did all that in only 2 weeks? That's where you need to like hook them. Like, just go check this out. This is the thing I built. Or you can tell me in the GitHub README, like this only took me 2 weeks to build or something. But I don't think that that's necessary on the resume. Now,
I've seen
if it was
a lot of those.
If it was a project that you did 5 years ago, then yeah, maybe tell me on the resume that that was a project you did 5 years ago, because then it's like, well, is the tech still relevant? Like, is the tech stack of how you built that project still relevant? I would hope that you're showing me that project on your resume because it's really relevant to what my business does. Otherwise, why is it on the resume in the first place? Go ahead, John.
I dropped the thread. Let's move on. What do we got? So
Okay.
It says one of those coding boot camps. Yes, that is exactly what we're talking about.
Yep.
3-month project, 6-month project. I was gonna say the projects that I've seen come out of code schools in 2 weeks often surpass 4-person production engineering teams over a quarter. They're fast and they're good. You actually are. I know that you may not feel it in that moment, but being able to focus exclusively on writing the code and go quickly and not have to have all of the meetings about telling everyone about what the code will be. And then like, I don't know, should we use React? Let's convene a committee of 18 individuals from across. We need a cross-functional team to decide if it's React or Vue. And like all of that nonsense, I miss so much about being in boot camp that I just got to ship. It was like, go all the time. It's kind of like those very early, like founding a startup kind of days. So like the time that it took you to build the thing is much less relevant, I think, than demonstrating, as Ian suggested, that you are user first, that you built the thing for you humans to use, that you recognize that computers are not valuable for their own sake. You're not here to please computers or to help computers. You're here to serve the users. You should be keeping the users at the forefront of your mind in everything you do. They should always be at the front of the sentence. This is a collaborative book sharing app that helps users determine which book to read next, built using React Fetch API. And Fetch API. If you build a modern web page and it includes no CSS, you are not building a modern web page. Unless you are a CSS specialist, I would hesitate to put CSS on your, like if you only have your skills as CSS, if that's the only technical skill, and this is totally valid. There are people who deep dive on CSS and they understand it really, really well. They're incredibly valuable in the industry. Then you talk a lot about CSS. But generally speaking, when you're putting HTML and CSS on there, like, are you rendering web pages on the internet? Well, then they're probably using those technologies.
Right. Good follow-up question in the chat. How do you highlight or how does what you highlight in your resume evolve over your career? Again, I think as you gain experience in the industry, your projects are going to become less and less important, and it's going to be more important about like, what did you do on the job? Like, tell me about the production things that you did. What sort of teams were you working on? And so that work experience is going to move up the page. And so for me, I would want to see skills and then your relevant work experience at that point. And then like your Trader Joe's job is going to completely fall off at some point. Like these other jobs, yeah, it's still interesting. Like Jonan said, like it still tells me a lot about you and about your character and the kinds of things that you're interested in and the things that you've done, but it's less important. And so if you don't need the space, these other jobs would go away and it'd be like, now I've worked at this company and this company and this company, and here's the technologies that I used and the kinds of projects I was involved in at that job. That's going to be way more relevant to me as an employer for someone who's got work experience. And so over time, these school projects will become less relevant and less necessary on the resume. Unless it's a project that's super relevant to my company, then by all means, put it on there, keep it at the top, because that's going to show me like, hey, I'm so passionate about what you do as a company. I've got this project that's right on par with what you do. That's a great selling point to show me that, you're strongly interested in what we do and not just you're looking for a paycheck and you happen to have the tech skills that I'm looking for. It's showing more of that passion and that sort of alignment, to use the buzzwordy kind of term. You're showing that we're both headed in the same direction at that point. So if there is a relevant project, even later in your career, if you've built something that's really relevant to them, put that on the resume. I think that's important to do. Someone
I think
asked
you should be.
Sorry, go ahead, Jonan, and then I want to follow up with a question that someone asked in chat.
I think you should be paying very careful attention to the common thread throughout this conversation, which is if it is directly relevant to this role, if it pertains to this company, if you have read the job description for the job that I am hiring and you're making it clear with your resume and your cover letter. Point is, quality over quantity. Don't do the spray and pray with hundreds of resumes everywhere. Apply for a few jobs at a time. Be like, all right, over the next week, I'm going to apply to 3 jobs that I really want and I really care about. And I'm going to do deep research every morning for 2 hours on those companies, who works there and what kind of technology they're into and what they're using. And then use that to carve your elephant.
Yep. So someone asked a follow-up question. You mentioned not listing JavaScript if you have React, as it's redundant. What I was mentioning is on the project itself. So on the project, if I'm listing React, then I don't need to list JavaScript. You absolutely want JavaScript in the skill block at the top, because the ATS system will need to find that keyword. But you don't necessarily have to say JavaScript on a particular project if that project used React, because again, like React implies JavaScript. Same thing with Ruby on Rails. You can list Ruby and Rails in your skills section, but for a project, just tell me Rails, because I can't write Python on Rails. I can't write JavaScript on Rails. I can only write Ruby. And so it implies there's a lot of implications. And that's also why Jonah was saying, like, you could probably shrink this whole skills block into fewer things, because some of it becomes a little redundant over time. Like, do you need to list HTML and CSS? Well, I would say, like, if you're an expert at HTML5, then I would have HTML5 specifically, like HTML5 expertise or something. Like, you know, if you've done that real deep dive on a topic, then yeah, highlight that on the resume. Otherwise, like, as a web developer, I hope you know HTML. Like, that's part of what we do. But
I want to apologize about that too. I don't mean to diminish CSS or HTML work. I'm saying those are pretty table stakes, and you're not actually conveying that much information when you tell me you know HTML and CSS. You may be someone who has known every version of HTML since Tim Berners-Lee created it, right? Like back in the day. I don't know that it was Sir Tim Berners-Lee, apologies. And like all of the progress and all of the deep history of HTML and all of the intricacies and weird things. Or you could be someone who can make H1s and H2s and knows the difference. And so, like, you're not conveying as much information as you think you are. In many cases, those become superfluous because you'll find yourself listing them in many, many places on the same page. If you are typing the same 3 characters, I see it right now on this page we're looking at least 4 times, right? That's too many times. You already told me you know CSS. I don't need to know anymore.
Some other good follow-up questions. So if you write a project using Next.js, does that imply React and JavaScript? It's like, well, and someone else mentioned, yeah, you can leave off React and JavaScript from the project description. You still want it to be in the skill block. It's got to be on the page somewhere, because if I'm searching my ATS, say, who knows React, and you've used Next.js, the ATS system isn't going to say, oh, well, if they know Next.js, they also know the following technologies. ATS systems are not that smart yet. I imagine someday they will be. But like, if you've got Rails on your resume and someone says, I need a Ruby programmer, and you don't actually put Ruby anywhere on the page, it's not going to find you. Similarly, and this kind of comes back to a point where Jonah was saying, like, put your hobbies on there. I would leave off a section that says, these are my interests. I'm interested in Java. Well, now you're going to get picked up as a Java developer when somebody's searching that ATS looking for Java. It's not going to show up in the skills block. It's not going to show up in your project. And they're like, why are you in there as a Java developer? Like, I would probably delete that profile out of the system completely as a misflagged application.
Hey, Ian, you just got raided. You got a raid of a bunch of people.
Raid of 19 people.
Chris.
What's up, Chris? Thanks for hanging out.
Yeah, what did you do over there? Were you talking about resumes? Were you like, hey, was the whole stream just about how cool Jonan and Ian are talking about resumes? I feel like that was it. That was what I would have streamed about.
So Chris, I think Chris was on the call earlier and then left and came back with a raid. So that's awesome. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell us what you were doing.
Coded Python. Oh, you coded Python. I got a nerd out on Python. What'd you build? Python's like my #1 language. What'd you make?
Really? It was an MLAI application. That's what everyone talking about.
That's great.
MLAI. Malai. Hi, Diana B19. Yes,
That's
actually,
awesome.
Python's a really fun language to play with, and
It is.
if you haven't played with Python, I encourage you to pick it up. There's a lot of stuff from Adafruit, who makes hardware devices. Like they use Circuit Python to run Python scripts on little small embedded devices. Python is a really handy language to know when you're trying to run
Raspberry
embedded
Pis and
things or
stuff.
work in in sciences. I've met people who used Python to measure the output of jet engines using lasers. He's like firing a laser in a wind tunnel through the jet engine
Ooh.
to measure the efficiency of the engines. He's like, yeah, we get a couple terabytes of data a second or something. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? Like
Yeah,
terabytes of
that's
data
awesome.
with these hashes of lasers running through the whole thing. It was really cool. Python
That's
does some
fantastic.
cool stuff, and there you find it in very interesting places. Thanks for the raid.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Ian. I
Yeah.
interrupted you to
No,
talk
no
about rating.
worries.
What were you talking
That's
through?
I forget now. I'm more interested
Yeah.
in Python.
More
So
interested in Python. Now we're just gonna go.
Yeah. I mean, the point of the stream here is we're just talking about like tech interview prep and career prep, and we're kind of doing a live resume review. Someone submitted an anonymized resume, which I prefer to have anonymized. So we're kind of talking about like what order should things be on the page? How do you talk about different kinds of skills? Like everything from bullet points to like little eye for detail, like the fact that there's a space in front of remote work on Zoom. Like I think remote work is fine. I don't think you need to mention Zoom. That's like saying I know how to check email. That kind of stuff doesn't need to be on a resume, but showing me that you know remote work, I think, is important. Like the fact that you've worked as part of a team. This is going to go back to something else about projects. I would really prefer to see on here, were these projects solo projects or group projects? Especially if you're applying for remote work, I would want to specifically see you highlight this was a solo project. See, I can get things done on my own. You're kind of validating that, yes, if I give you a task, you're going to get it done. If all of these were group projects, it's like, okay, well, you know how to work remotely in a group setting. That can also be good too. But I think with a lot of remote work, there's a lot of inherent trust that goes on. So having maybe like one or two solo projects on here could be valid as well. And so I would personally want to see that kind of thing called out on the resume. Like, was this a solo project or a group effort or like a paired project? Like Turing does 2-person projects and then like larger projects from 3 to 10 people. And so I would want to see those numbers quantified on here as well.
Nikki T Online points out that Zoom filters are a skill. You can never forget the cat-faced lawyer.
That's right.
I would also say this should be included under the hobbies section. Remember, hobbies has a drawing of you breaking a board, like a hand-drawn MS Paint style karate kicking a board, and it says karate. Second entry is I make really good Zoom filters, and then like another crudely drawn illustration of your Zoom filter. If you haven't figured out yet, the hobbies section is a joke in its entirety. Please don't include hobbies.
Cool. So yeah, so we talked about other things like don't use a vertical bar to separate things. Just use a comma or leave white space in here because it can be interruptive to read. Overall though, I like the use of bold and a little bit of italics in here. I think that was good. Again, I would probably bold some of the main technologies that you really want to highlight on the resume. So if I'm looking for a React developer, and you know that about my job post, I would be throwing a bold on that React so it really stands out when I'm scanning down the page. The ATS, the Applicant Tracking System, is going to pick up those keywords either way, but when a human looks at it and they're kind of scanning through going, where have they used React? It's like, oh, React. They're going to see those things on the page. And so you're showing them, I'm a React developer. Here's where I've used that skill. But be judicious about it. Don't use it like, I would say like bold and italics, use it like hot sauce. You don't want to just dump it on there, otherwise it loses its effect. So you just want to like sprinkle it on there a little bit to really get the point of like really, again, drawing their attention. So something that I mentioned while Jonan was off the screen was talking about like how the eye sort of flows around the page. And if you can throw a little bit of bold in there, again, you're going to pull my eye in that direction. I'm more likely to pay attention to what's on the page at that point.
I've been sitting here trying to find my resume and ensure that I'm not lying about the hobby section. I feel like that's very much a thing I would include in my resume. Yeah, I probably did.
By the way, Jonan's a really good karaoke singer, so I hope he's got that on his resume at least. So we were debugging all the audio last night at like midnight, 1 a.m. or something, and he's like, karaokeing Journey or something. I forget what you were singing now. But
don't stop believe. Yeah, it was good times. You have to keep the audio going like One of the hardest parts about
Right.
debugging audio with other people is I'm like,
It's
okay,
actually
make some
talking.
noise, and someone would be like, hello. I'm like,
Right.
cool,
It's like,
because
no, it needs to be
you
a
gave me a
stream of
full half
sound
second. Yeah, I need a stream
to
of
try to
audio
debug.
to determine when I've got it and what the volume levels are. So I was like, hi.
Right.
I'm like, cool. I missed
Yeah.
the 20 millisecond
Give me
window.
more
Could
than
you
that.
say more noise? Yeah.
Coding more. Now I have to remove my Space Wizard dinosaur cowboy illustration from my resume. Jen had a really great follow-up. What if your hobbies are contributing to open source or nonprofit groups that mentor early career developers? Like me, that is almost word for word on my own resume. Like, these are things that I love too. I think that you can highlight that in different ways. I don't know that it needs to be called hobbies. I would actually list that under a project section. Like, these are projects that I'm involved in, or like professional involvement or something like that, where you can call out nonprofit groups and coaching that you do that is relevant. Again, it's got to be relevant to the company. Like, don't put a lot of fluff on here. Like, like we kind of talked about earlier, a resume is a concise list of facts. Like, just the facts, ma'am. Like, just only tell me what I absolutely need to see about you, because I'm looking at this going, should I hire you? Here's a little thing that a lot of people don't understand about interviewing. If I'm actually doing a tech interview with you, I'm looking for a reason to say yes. But when I'm looking at your resume, I'm looking for a reason to say no, because I have so many of these to go through. And so if you're like making things hard to see because you're just filling up the resume with a bunch of stuff that I shouldn't pay attention to, I'm just going to throw the thing out and I'm going to look for something where I can more easily spot those stuff. And so if you've got something that's highly relevant to you as a human and to me as a business, and you're showing that alignment, like we're both headed in the same direction for reasons, get that on the resume, because that's where you're going to really capture my attention and go, this is a person we need to call. So yeah, if that's relevant, then absolutely put that on the resume. If our company doesn't work in open source, it's like, okay, well, that's cool, you work in open source, but we don't. I mean, just about every company I've ever worked with has done some level of open source. I'm a huge fan of like, share what we know. It's the whole tagline of this stream of like, share what you know and we all win. That's why we're here. That's why we're sharing. We're dumping our brains into all of you. And again, I appreciate Jonan spending the time with us tonight to kind of go over this stuff. And so if that is a relevant thing to the company, absolutely get that on the resume. Otherwise, it doesn't need to be there.
They asked in chat what format was correct for a resume. PDF is the one true format. Use PDF.
Nope.
Also,
Nope.
yep.
Nope.
Incorrect.
Applicant tracking systems much prefer the .doc format. So Word document if you're submitting it to an applicant tracking system.
Please don't ever do that to me. If you're ever applying to a job in which I am involved at all, and you send me a docx, I judge you immediately. Similarly to how I would judge you if you have a Hotmail address in your resume.
AOL?
All of those things are
AOL,
incorrect.
okay?
No, there's Gmail and there is your own domain, and those are the choices.
And that's
I'm
it.
sorry. That's it. Really, that's all that I will respect on there. And I will absolutely fight to the death for PDFs. Don't name your resume resume.pdf. I just searched on my computer trying to find my own resume. For resume, I have a list of 40 or 50 files named resume.pdf that are identical. I can't find my own resume because of you jokers. Get out of here with that nonsense. Call it Scheffler resume. Whatever your name is, don't use my name unless you're trying to apply
even better
me, which is fine.
Would be your name dash their company name dash resume 2021 doc or something like that. Again, PDF files are great for humans to read, but applicant tracking systems can't always grab data out of PDFs. And I actually demonstrated this to a student one time where I just did like a Command A or Control A to just highlight all the text on the resume, copy, and then pasted it into just a code editor, just a text code editor, and then showing them how it mangles the text and it puts things in weird orders. That's how the applicant tracking system is going to read it out of that PDF. And so an applicant tracking system really must be a Word document. PDF for a human, but doc for applicant tracking systems. Otherwise,
don't send me any of your doc files. I will ignore you. I might send you hate mail back. Don't do it.
But that raises a question then of, how do people apply for a job? Do they upload both, or do they pick one or the other?
If you want to apply to soulless corporations who are going to use ATS systems to determine your value as a human being. If you want to apply someone who's going to quantify you exactly in dollars and cents and depends on you using a doc file to do that, then by all means submit doc files. If you want to live your life correctly, use PDF. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it.
Right.
That, yeah. No, I yield again to Ian on this. Ian clearly has experience hacking ATS stuff. I don't at all because I don't care about it, because I'm going to go to someone and I'm going to say, hey, yeah, I saw you reached out to this thing. You have a resume I can use to put you up into the system. Sorry about the trouble. Let's have a call and we'll do some pair programming. Yeah. That's how I end up getting people for jobs.
More and more companies are starting to automate this process and getting on some kind of applicant tracking system, or they're using a recruiting team that's using an automated ATS system. And so you kind of have to play by those rules. And I would always err on the side of this is going to go into some automated system and just send it in a doc format. I ask, so if you want the free resume review on the stream, you can submit it to me. I ask for it in PDF format just so it's visually like a lot easier to read. And it's really easy for me just to pull up in a browser. That's why I ask for it in PDF format. So PDF for humans, PDF for humans, doc for applicant tracking systems.
Applicant tracking systems, if you're trying to beat an applicant tracking system, you're trying to get your resume to come through the recruiter pipeline.
Right.
You should have a referral. Every referral for any job I'm ever hiring for gets a call. I will talk to anyone that someone I know personally at my company has. It's just common courtesy. If I work with you and you have an introduction to me, like through this referral process, I will get on the phone with you and I will talk to you. I'm not actually unbiased in this because the number of people I have ever hired that a recruiter sent me is 0. Ever.
Interesting.
I have never gained value from the traditional ATS recruiting strategy pipeline. I have gone out to job boards myself and I have posted the job. People come and they apply. I explicitly instruct recruiters not to reject candidates under any circumstances. And I go through the people who have applied and I determine which ones. I screen my own resumes. I don't let computers do it. I don't let recruiters do it. I am a unique case and it doesn't work at scale. Jonan does not scale. So take Ian's advice more often than not.
I have a personal gripe that is long lasting around like the whole headhunter style recruiting, like people like that are like, oh, send me your resume and I'm gonna like market you out to a bunch of places. I typically avoid those like anything. And so I would like if it's an internal recruiting team in a company, that's very different. But if it's someone that's like, hey, I heard about this job, I can't tell you who the company is, then they're more of the headhunter style, what I would call. And I've got a whole blog series on iandouglas.com about how much I hate those people. And I hold no qualms against publicly shaming them. And just how much I hate that style of recruiting. It's a very broken, very biased way of doing things because they're only in it for the bucks. They're going to make like 15-20% of your salary if they place you at a job. And so they're going to shotgun your resume out to a bunch of people. They're probably going to modify your resume and shotgun it out to a bunch of people. And the resume they get may look nothing like yours. And so all the time that you spent crafting them that resume, they're just going to like dice it and slice it however they want and then send that back out to other places. And you have very little, if any, control over what that resume looks like going out to those companies. And you may end up getting misrepresented in a lot of cases. And that disqualifies you from a job that you could have potentially just applied to yourself. And so I would say early in your career, sometimes a recruiter can be helpful because they may know about companies that are willing to hire entry-level devs. But once you get 2-3 years experience, you don't need a recruiter to help you find a job. You really don't. You'll be able to find a job on your own at that point. Cool. So we've got about 20 minutes longer than we had intended on the stream. But I'm happy to hang out for a little bit longer if other folks have questions. There were some questions about file extensions and so on. I would say either doc or docx. Either of those formats should be fine for an applicant tracking system, as long as it's made in Microsoft Word or some equivalent where it can export into Microsoft Word and still look okay. Like if you write it in Google Docs and you export it as a Word doc, it may change some of the formatting. The applicant tracking system will be able to read it, but any human looking at it's going to go, ew. And so if there's any way to preview what that's going to look like, as it's exporting in Word document format, I think that would be wise. But otherwise, I don't think the extension matters as much. But if you design it and do it in Microsoft Word, the applicant tracking system will actually give preference to that. PDF format, it may not be able to grab the data in the order that you're putting it on there.
I want to summarize all of Ian's points.
Yeah.
The correct answer is PDF. What Ian's trying to say is use PDFs all the time. Only PDFs, the one true file format. Thank you.
You're killing me, Jonan. You're killing me.
I'm sorry.
It's all good. Like I said, PDF for humans, .doc for applicant tracking systems. If like Jonan said, if you've got a referral into the company, give them a PDF. If that HR team comes back and says, well, they have to apply online anyway, then you upload a document format or .doc format. But at least they've seen the PDF version of that, and so then the applicant tracking system can kind of parse that any way that it needs to at that point. Cool. Looks like Jonan's video has frozen on the stream again. I need to debug why. My video is coming through fine, but Jonan's just kind of frozen in this.
At least I look really good. That's
great.
A good look right there. Yeah,
it is a good look.
Kind of. Yeah, I look excited. That's good.
Yep.
Should Agile workflow be on there? I'm not sure what that means. Yes, actually, Agile should be on there. Agile software development is a technique for building software that indicates to me that you have worked on modern software teams. The alternative being like waterfall, wherein the architects come and write the spec, bum, 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 or the team sits down and writes the spec. Here are all of the excruciatingly painful details of what this software will be. Now we will commence typing of the code. And then 10% of the way through, you're like, wait, all the assumptions were wrong and we're actually building something different than we thought. And then you start over with the spec, bum, 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 and you do that infinitely until no software is actually delivered or something broken and like piecemeal is sent out the door.
Yeah.
Agile software development, while it can be implemented poorly, usually involves several certified Scrum Masters when done wrong. Agile is a really smart way to build software, wherein you decide the thing that makes your product minimum viable product, MVP. And that doesn't mean this is what you think is going to add value, but like, that this is the point where someone's going to find joy in your product. Like a minimum viable product is a URL that you can hit and maybe a login button, but I'm going to use that app. You're going to send it to me, and then I'm going to be very disappointed to find out that there are no features inside of it. Your goal in building an MVP is to focus on your users, find something that will surprise them, get to the point, like the minimum trip to joy, show them something cool, give them some reason to come back and investigate as you continue building out the app. So build that thing. And when you're doing Agile software development, you decide the minimum feature set that is necessary to get to that point, and then you iterate over those features and you ship it. And then you continue to improve every day, as deploying as often as you possibly can. Unless you require updates from me, please stop doing the thing where I get a pop-up every time I open your desktop app to update the software. I have some things installed. OBS comes to mind. The Streamlabs OBS Live, literally every time I open it, it's like, new update. Do you want to restart your computer? No, I don't. I want to stream. I've got 3 minutes before I'm supposed to be live. What are you doing?
Jen asked in chat, do we care about if the resume looks more modern, like what kind of font to use? Me personally, as a human, I think that non-serif fonts are easier to read. Again, it comes down to a human bias on that sort of thing. Applicant tracking systems won't care what font you use, just never use Comic Sans.
Tech people prefer non-serif fonts. Serif fonts are traditionally used in print. Non-serif fonts are used in online in sites and all of the same. Like if you are using a serif font on your website, you're going for a very particular look where you are emulating something printed, like you're trying to make it look like it appears in a newspaper.
Yeah, I generally tell people you get 3 font sizes on the page. Your name should be 14 to 20 point font. Your headings like summary, skills, education could be like 12 to 14 point. Everything else on that page should be the same size, and either 9 point or 10 point is fine. I probably wouldn't go larger than 10 point because then it just looks like you've got less to say and you're just increasing the font to fill the space. And I wouldn't go smaller than 9 point font because then that makes it look like you're trying to cram so much on the page that you've got too much content in the first place. So I would probably aim for 10 point font for everything else. So in this particular anonymous or anonymized resume, like all the contact info should be 10 point font. All of the bullet points should be 10 point font. But like skills and summary, you could maybe bump that up to 12 point if you want to. You don't have to. But your name should always be a slightly bigger font, but don't make it enormous. Don't use like 72 point font. I would cap it at like 20 point font. I do like the use of color. In this case, the font choice and the color kind of matches the link and so on. So a little bit of color is okay. I try not to go too fancy, like, have like a left column that's like, a pale blue or something and white on the other side, because I think you can get into like contrast problems. And so you do need to be a little bit mindful about contrast when you're looking at this, and just, like plain black text on white page, I think is the most easily readable sort of format.
I'm looking at my own resume.
Go ahead.
I'm looking at my own resume right now, and I use color in two places. I have my Twitter logo where it says the Jonan Show, and I have my little Twitter icon in blue, and then I have just the links. The links are colored because that's what I want people, and they're all Bitly links, so I can know if people actually read my resume. If I apply for a job and someone didn't click on any of the links, then I know they don't have any idea of the work that I've done, which I only use as intelligence gathering. I don't necessarily judge them for it. People are busy. I get it.
Sure. So going back in the chat a little bit, so some folks were asking like, PWA, like what is PWA? And is it okay to abbreviate some of those kinds of things? I would say like people that are like sort of in the know, like Progressive Web App, they're going to know what PWA means, but like if it's a non-technical recruiter, they're going to look at that and go, I have no idea what PWA is. Like the manager asked me to look for, progressive web app developer, and I don't know what PWA is. Do those match up? Like if they don't know, the applicant tracking system may not have that correlation. Your resume may not come up on a search. But spelling out progressive web app is like a huge amount of text versus PWA. Jonah, what are your thoughts on abbreviating those kinds of things?
Don't abbreviate things. Like PWA is out of the mainstream enough. CSS, I know what that means. HTML, I know what that means. It does not mean Carmen, how to meet ladies. It means hypertext
how to meet llamas.
Language, but how to meet llamas. The abbreviation that you should use should be like everyone in and out of tech knows what that thing is, right? Like my mother, given enough time, could probably guess what HTML is. Like, oh, I think I've heard that before. It doesn't work in tech, not a programmer. Could probably get there. But PWA, that's not a thing that most people know. Just type progressive web app if it's that important for you to convey that you know how to do that thing. Because if I, as a hiring manager, explaining to a recruiter what I'm looking for, I'm not going to say PWA. I'm looking for progressive web app developers. I'm looking for people who have, if it says progressive web app in their resume, I want to talk to that person, right? I'm not as often going to be giving acronym explanations because I want to explain things in a way that humans understand. Yeah, it's long, it's more words. To save some space by cutting your fifth mention of CSS from your resume and then include progressive web apps.
Also, one last thing about bullet points. Bullet points got their name from being fast and impactful. And so bullet points don't have to be grammatically correct sentences, and you don't need to end them with a period. So I would drop the period off the end of this, and I would turn all the other bullet points, like instead of like allows users to collaboratively decide which book to read next, I would just say users can collaborate on book reading, or, like make it short. Again, make it impactful. You've only got 5 or 6 words that they're really going to read anyway. But if you can get to like at most maybe 10 words, again, you only want to go about 2/3 of the width across the page at most, because they're not going to probably read the whole thing anyway. The applicant tracking system isn't going to care as much about the user empathy side of things as it will about the actual keywords around like the tech stack that you used and the technologies that you know. But a human reading it, they're going to read some of it, but they're not going to read every single word on the page. And so just keep that in mind as you're doing that. Again, this is for North American resumes only. Other nationalities and so on will vary quite a bit from there. Cool. I think we're gonna wrap up there. We've been at this for 2.5 hours. I think we'll save some awesome for the next stream. So Sunday we're gonna get into like company research, how to do company research. So Thursdays are gonna be like chats like this, where I chat with folks like Jonan and Peter. Thanks again to Peter for hanging out earlier on the stream. Sundays we may have a guest from time to time. We're gonna do more resume reviews and things like that. So please submit a resume review. Go check out techinterview.guide. There's a spot on there for the streaming link, and there's a resume submission form on there that you can send me a resume to screen on a future stream. Feel free to anonymize it, otherwise your information is going to be all over the interwebs. But Sunday we're going to get into company research, how to get ready for the job hunt that week. We're going to kind of take some of the stuff that we've learned tonight and think about like how do we like find a job post, and how do we tailor a resume for a job post or something like that. So come hang out with us again on Sunday. It'll be probably just me, but come hang out with me on Sunday. Feel free to follow on Twitch and get those notifications and so on. And like and subscribe, because this is going on YouTube later. I'm not very good at selling myself. I'm just here to help people. I don't care about monetization on this stuff. I don't care about like all the likes and subscribers and stuff. I'm just here to help people out. And so if you find this helpful, tell other people about it. That's really all I care about. Let's share what we know with everybody, because it's going to make us all better. And so share this with other tech friends. Spread the word if you can. That's awesome. I'm Ian Douglas 736 on Twitter, LinkedIn, and here on Twitch, obviously. Feel free to follow me. If you've got other specific questions, you can email me at ian.douglas@techinterview.guide. All my contact info is on the site. I've got a daily email series which kind of presents common interview questions from an interviewer's perspective. Like, why am I asking that kind of question? It's a 6-week long campaign. Once it's done, it unsubscribes you. It's free. There's no sign up there's sign up involved. Like, just give me your email address. Once it's done, it unsubscribes you. You'll never hear back from me again. I don't believe in remarketing and spamming folks and all kind of stuff. I'm just here to help. And so anything I can do to kind of like get this knowledge out and then have you kind of contribute as well, that would be fantastic. So thanks for hanging out on the stream. We're going to wrap up here. Jonan, thank you so much for debugging audio and stuff with me late last night too. Appreciate all your help just getting the stream set up. So
It's
appreciate
my pleasure.
everybody coming by, and we'll wrap up there. So cool.
We should
Thanks,
raid
everyone.
someone, Ian. You always want to
Yeah.
raid someone when you end a stream. And
who do we want to
I do
raid?
want to point out, we're going to ask chat to post the name of someone for us to raid. And I do want to point out that I do care about the monetization of Ian's content specifically.
Aw.
If you Venmo me $20, I'll give you Ian's home address just to help Ian
Ooh.
out. So yeah, you're welcome.
How does Jonan have my home address?
I don't. Someone recommend someone for us to go and find here. Go on
So
Twitch
I
and
follow-
find someone code tangential.
I follow a guy on Twitch named RWX Rob. He does Go programming, and he's pretty interesting. He gets into some pretty interesting stuff, so we could go raid his channel. But he's not always online. His stream is always there, but he's not always there. So if we
Let's
end
go
up raiding
check.
there,
I'll go
then
check.
what do we do? All right, so you go check, and it's RWX Rob, ROB.
All right.
And if he's there, if he's streaming, then we'll go raid his channel. And aside from that, thanks for hanging out, everybody. If you've got other questions, please submit them to me. You can email me as well. If you've got resumes, please upload those. I'm happy to do like live resume reviews. I'm hoping on Sundays I can get through probably 2 or 3 resumes. I've got another one queued up for Sunday already. But if you've got a resume that you'd like to kind of like go over on the live stream, I'm happy to do that. If you want a paid resume review, I'll make you a little half-hour feedback video on things that I would do to improve. But if you want a private consultation, you also need to send me the job post so that I can see how well you've tailored that resume. And that one, I will ask you to spend some money on that one. Cool. Is he
Jen
there,
says
Jonan?
it's J Phils. He is not. We have it's J Phils and Sympathy. Both Sympathy is talking about game dev and Twitch integration, and I'm going to look up what it's J Phils is talking about, and then I will let you decide as the boss of the raid command which one we're going to go see. It's J
I'm a big fan of
Phils
game development.
is doing 100 days of code, and
Ooh, that's good
so
too.
that's a tough fight. Yep. Former DJ,
Let's do 100 Days
currently in
Code.
engineering leadership. Yep. All right.
Yep.
J Fills.
Let's
So
go to that one.
it's J Fills. I think Jen included an apostrophe. You don't want to type /raid space its_J_Fills, and we will be off to join our new
It's
friend.
J Fills. So just /raid space and then the name.
That's it.
All right, let's do it. Thanks everybody for hanging out. We'll see you on Sunday, same time, 7 p.m. Mountain, which is 6 p.m. Eastern, or 6 p.m. Pacific, and 9 p.m. Eastern time. We'll see you next time. Cheers.
PDFs. Bye.